Hey guys, tonight's story doesn't start with lullabies or soft blankets. It starts with cold air, a screaming baby, and a midwife who looks you over like you're already late for your first kill. Instead of a rattle, she drops a knife the size of a carrot onto your cradle and calls it a blessing. The goats in the yard stop chewing long enough to glare at you, like they know what's coming. Your father nods proudly. Your mother sighs like she's regretting everything. And you, tiny, drooling, helpless. You've just been drafted. Welcome to your destiny. But before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. The first thing you know is cold air and loud voices. You flail your tiny fists, your lungs working overtime, and instead of coos of delight or gentle blessings, someone leans over your cradle with the solemnity of a priest and declares, "Ah, this one is destined for killing." You are barely an hour old, and already you have a career path. Your parents nod. Not because they agree, but because in this village you do not argue with midwives, especially ones who carry knives tucked into their stockings. She produces a blade the length of a carrot and lays it on your blanket like it is your christening gift. Other children get saints watching over them. You get a weapon and a warning that your future will involve blood and goats. No one elaborates on the goat part, but everyone nods as if this makes perfect sense. Your first night on Earth is not filled with lullabies. It is filled with whispered discussions over whether your tiny fists already look like they could strangle a pigeon. You sneeze, which someone interprets as a sign of great stealth. Your mother tries to hum you to sleep, but your father insists you should learn to appreciate silence. He shoos her away and spends 3 hours glaring at you in the dark, as if you might reveal your first assassination technique before dawn. You burp instead. He calls it promising. Life in your family is never ordinary, but even by their standards, your infancy is strange. When other babies are given wooden rattles carved with smiling suns, you are given a toy dagger with the edges carefully dulled, but still sharp enough to make the neighbor nervous. When you drop it on the floor, your father nods approvingly and says, "Good." He is learning how to disarm himself early. Your mother wonders if you could at least have a blanket that doesn't smell faintly of poison berries, but she is overruled. Comfort builds weakness, someone mutters. You gurgle, spit up, and fall asleep in the middle of this important lesson. The first time you crawl, it is not toward your mother's arms or the warm hearth. It is toward the shadows under the table, where a knife has been left out, half cleaned and glinting like a beacon. You manage to grab it, lift it proudly, and immediately drop it on your own foot. You howl, your parents cheer. Clearly, you have begun your training. The neighbor's child learns to say "Mama" and "Papa." Your first word is "stab." Though to be fair, it sounds a lot like "dab," and there is still some debate about whether you were just sneezing. When you are carried to the village square for the first time, wrapped tightly in cloth, the other mothers look at you with pity. Their children coo, suck their thumbs, or tug at bits of wool. You stare at everyone with narrowed eyes as though you are memorizing weaknesses. A farmer's wife whispers that you look like a tiny debt collector. The baker's boy tries to pat your head and nearly loses a finger to your reflexive grab. Your reputation begins before you can walk. By the time you can toddle, people are crossing the street to avoid you, which is impressive, given you have not yet figured out how to use a spoon. Even goats keep their distance. The midwife was right. Animals sense something in you. One bleats loudly every time you wobble past, as though warning the village of your presence. Another refuses to graze if you are nearby, staring at you with the hard, unblinking eyes of someone who has already seen its death written in the stars. You reach out your hand, hoping for affection, and the goat sneezes in your face. Somewhere behind you, your father calls this an omen of strength. You are not so sure. Your earliest attempts at play are indistinguishable from early attempts at violence. You build towers of stones and then knock them down with the focus of a siege engineer. You play peekaboo by vanishing into cupboards and refusing to reappear until your mother is frantic. You gnaw on sticks until splinters lodge in your gums, and when pulled away, you scream with a fury that makes even the priest hesitate. He sprinkles you with holy water, just in case. You sneeze again. The villagers murmur that you are practicing poisons. At night, you lie in your cradle, tiny fists opening and closing, eyes wide in the dark. Your parents whisper about the future they imagine for you. Missions, shadows, whispered names, coins exchanging hands in the tavern. They talk about how you will be feared, how you will be respected, how you will make your mark. No one asks what you would prefer, mostly because you cannot yet speak, but also because no assassin in training is given the luxury of preference. You burble, roll onto your stomach, and dream of milk. Your first steps are clumsy, but you take them with a seriousness usually reserved for executions. You stumble across the room, arms outstretched like a drunk noble after a feast, and immediately crash into the firewood pile. You emerge with a log in your hand, triumphant. Your family takes this as proof you already understand improvised weapons. The midwife, who has come to check on you, nods gravely. "Yes," she says. He walks like a killer, very unsteady, very quiet, very doomed. She pats your mother's arm and leaves without further explanation. By the time you are weaned, you have chewed through 3 leather belts, 4 corners of the table, and 1 unfortunate shoe. Each act is declared training for your teeth, which will someday gnash through ropes in daring escapes. You would settle for porridge that doesn't taste like dirt, but no one asks. Instead, you are told stories of assassins past, men who leapt from rooftops into glory, and women who vanished into shadows, leaving only rumors. You do not understand the stories, but you like the way the firelight dances on the walls. You imagine it is the world flickering, just for you. You are still barely a child when you realize the truth. You are not going to be anything else. The path is laid, the tools handed down, the whispers growing each time you toddle past. You will not be a baker or a miller or a shepherd. You are the boy with the dagger rattle, the one who glares at goats, the one who sneezes when sprinkled with holy water. You are the assassin child. And though you are still small enough to be carried, the weight of expectation presses down like a stone. You close your eyes, drift into dreams of shadows and strange futures, and somewhere outside, the goat sneezes again. You are 2 years old, still small enough to be scooped under one arm like a sack of flour, but already heavy with expectation. Other toddlers in the village get toys carved from wood, horses with crooked legs, whistles that sound like ducks being strangled, rattles stuffed with beans. You, however, are presented with a knife. Not a sharp knife, mind you. At least that's what your father insists as he presses it into your chubby hands, but still very much a blade. The handle is too big for your grip, the metal too cold for your gums. Yet everyone in the cottage watches with pride as you wobble it dangerously close to your own face. You drool on the blade. Your father calls this initiating the bond. The first time you lift it above your head, it slips from your fingers and lands point down in the floorboards. There is silence for half a heartbeat, then a cheer. Your mother claps as if you've just performed a miracle. The midwife, who seems to appear at every significant moment of your young life like a grim fairy godmother, nods gravely and says, "Yes." He has the wrist for it. You are too busy sucking your thumb to notice. Later, you nearly slice your own toes while trying to copy your father's exaggerated lunges, and rather than intervene, your parents watch with the patience of gardeners waiting for a seedling to sprout. When you trip over the stool and fall flat on your face, your father scoops you up and declares it essential training in resilience. You are bleeding from your nose, but everyone applauds. Meal times are no less perilous. Other children are given porridge, soft bread, or mashed turnips. You are given a wooden bowl, a spoon, and your knife beside it, as if someone expects you to fend off attackers during breakfast. You try to stir your porridge with the blade. It slops onto your lap. Your father leans back, sighs proudly, and mutters, "Resourcefulness." Your mother wipes your chin, half smiling but muttering about wishing she could raise at least one child who doesn't terrify the neighbors. You are an only child. The hope is misplaced. Your first word remains a matter of debate. Your mother insists it was "mama." Your father swears it was "stab." Both may have been wishful thinking because the sound you actually made was more like "da." But no one wants to admit that the legendary assassin child started his vocabulary with a noise that sounded like a hiccup. Regardless, they continue to interpret everything you do as evidence of your destiny. When you trip and bite your tongue, your father insists it's an omen that you'll be silent in the face of pain. When you accidentally hit yourself in the forehead with the blunt end of the knife, your mother declares you're learning the cost of carelessness. You are not learning anything except how unfair it is that porridge tastes like damp hay, but nobody asks you. The villagers begin to notice your peculiar training. Children playing in the square clutch dolls made of rags and straw. You arrive dragging your practice knife, drooling slightly, with your tunic askew and your hair sticking up in every direction. The other children scatter as though you are carrying plague. A boy older than you tries to show off by spinning a wooden hoop. You throw your knife at it. You miss by 4 feet and fall over from the effort, but the sight of a blade sticking out of the mud is enough to end the game. The boy cries. His mother complains. Your father beams with pride. "That's intimidation," he says. The goat remains your sworn enemy. Every time you toddle out into the yard, blade clutched in your sticky hand, the goat freezes, eyes wide, nostrils flaring as though it can smell the absurd future. Once, you trip over its tether and end up face first in the dirt. You cry. The goat sneezes directly into your hair, and your parents take this as a solemn exchange of oaths. You and the goat are now bound, they say, rivals until death. You are still wearing a diaper. Your playpen is not filled with soft toys or blocks. It is filled with obstacles. A tiny wall of firewood to climb. A stool balanced precariously, so you learn to fall quietly. A sack of flour you are supposed to stab until it leaks. You do none of these things correctly. You mostly sit in the corner gnawing on your knife handle and humming nonsense to yourself. Your father interprets the humming as chanting for focus. Your mother rolls her eyes and fetches more porridge. Sleep offers no escape. Instead of lullabies, you are sung ballads of famous assassins, men who leapt from rooftops and vanished into legend, women who slipped poison into goblets with such grace that nobles thanked them afterward. You do not understand a word, but you like the rhythm, the way the flames dance on the walls while your parents whisper that someday you will be feared. You suck your fingers and fart loudly in response. Your mother laughs. Your father mutters something about gas as a distraction technique. By the time you are 3, you have a collection of bruises that could be mistaken for a map of the known world. Your arms are scratched, your knees perpetually scraped, and your practice blade is dented from being thrown at every object in the house that looked remotely threatening, including the cat. The cat does not forgive. It watches you with narrowed eyes from high shelves, plotting revenge. You watch back, knife in hand, drool on your chin, plotting nothing. You do not understand yet that your life is not like other children's. You only know that your toys are sharper, your parents prouder, and your world stranger. You fall asleep each night with the weight of a blade beside your bed, too young to know the word destiny, but old enough to clutch it in your dreams. And somewhere outside, the goat sneezes again. as though reminding you that even the smallest enemies are waiting. You are 4 years old, and games are supposed to be fun. At least, that's what you hear other children say when they laugh in the fields, chasing each other with sticks and pretending they are knights or pirates or, on particularly chaotic days, both. Your childhood, however, is not about laughter. It is about silence. When the older children play hide and seek, their parents shout things like, "Don't peek," and "No fair counting too fast." When you play, your father leans against the doorframe with his arms crossed and mutters, "Blend with the shadows, or you'll be dead before 7. You are not entirely sure what that means, but it feels like something important, so you nod gravely, even though you're still clutching a piece of stale bread in one hand and wiping snot on your sleeve with the other. The rules of the game are simple. Hide. Don't be found. The execution, however, is more like a lesson in military tactics. Your father paces like a general, giving orders before a battle. Don't just hide. Vanish. Don't just crouch. Disappear. If they can see your shoe, they can see your grave. You glance down at your shoes, which are actually just lopsided scraps of leather tied with string. One flap sticks up like a tongue. You wiggle it nervously. The other children stare at you with wide eyes, already regretting agreeing to play with the assassin's son. The first round begins, and you bolt for the nearest stack of hay, diving into it with all the grace of a sack of potatoes. Hay sticks in your hair, pricks your skin, and somehow ends up in your mouth. You sneeze. Your father shakes his head. "The shadows don't sneeze," he says. You are pulled out by your ankle 5 seconds later by a girl half your size who looks smug enough to declare herself queen of the game. You sulk, scratching hay from your ear while your father mutters about how assassins do not sulk, assassins brood. You attempt to brood. It looks suspiciously like constipation. Next round, you try harder. You run into the stable, thinking the smell will cover your tracks. The donkey disagrees. It brays so loudly that the entire village turns its head. You panic and climb into the hay trough, only for the donkey to lean over and sneeze directly into your face. When they find you, drenched and horrified, you insist it was part of your plan. No one believes you. Your father, however, nods approvingly and says, "Improvised cover is a valuable skill. You don't know what cover means, but you are fairly sure it shouldn't involve donkey mucus." The older boys start to treat the game like a hunt. They whisper strategies and point toward the shadows where you crouch, convinced they can root you out like foxes in a burrow. You try to copy their whispers, only yours come out too loud, and suddenly everyone knows exactly where you are. You clutch your knife-shaped toy and mutter the only excuse you can think of. You were luring them in. Nobody buys it, except your father, who claps your shoulder so hard you nearly fall over and declares you a master of psychological warfare. One afternoon, when the sun is low and the air thick with flies, you finally manage to win a round, not by skill, not by silence, but because you accidentally crawl into a barrel in the corner of the square and promptly fall asleep. For 3 hours you snore softly, knees tucked to your chest, while the rest of the children tear the village apart looking for you. By the time you are discovered, the game has ended, dinner has been eaten, and your father has started telling the neighbors about his child, who can become invisible. You stagger out of the barrel, covered in bruises and smelling faintly of pickled cabbage, but triumphant nonetheless. You have learned that sometimes victory comes not from brilliance, but from unconsciousness. From then on, barrels become your preferred hiding place. You try different ones: flour barrels, water barrels, even one that turned out to contain fish. The flour barrel makes you sneeze, the water barrel nearly drowns you, and the fish barrel earns you a scolding from the fishmonger who claims you now smell worse than his wares. But in each case, you cling to the belief that you are training, honing your skills, even if those skills mostly involve learning how not to suffocate in confined spaces. Your parents, meanwhile, double down. Hide and seek is no longer a pastime. It is a ritual. Every evening after supper, you are sent outside with instructions to vanish. Sometimes they give you a head start. Sometimes they blindfold you. Once, your uncle tied a bell around your ankle to increase difficulty. You limped into the bushes, jingling like a suicidal goat, while your family watched proudly. You were caught immediately, but your father declared it a valuable lesson in humility. You declare it unfair. Nobody listens. The villagers start to notice the spectacle. They sit on benches, sipping ale, and watch as you scuttle behind barrels, leap over fences, and crouch under carts with the determination of a very small, very doomed fox. Children whisper that you are cursed. Adults mutter that you are peculiar. The baker says he once saw you crouched on his roof at dawn, holding a stick like a sword, glaring at pigeons as if they were mortal enemies. The pigeons ignored you. The baker pretended not to notice, but slowly, very slowly, you improve. You learn to breathe quieter, to move slower, to keep your lopsided shoes tucked beneath you so they don't stick out. You discover that chickens will betray you every time, clucking loudly the moment you crouch near them. Cats, however, are excellent allies, provided you don't step on their tails. You begin to vanish into haystacks without sneezing, slide beneath wagons without kicking over the bucket tied to the wheel, and climb trees without screaming the entire way up. By the time you are 5, your father declares you a shadow among shadows. You are, in truth, just a child with better hiding spots, but it feels like something more. You never stop being found. Someone always yanks your tunic, pulls you from a hole, or points triumphantly at the barrel where you've wedged yourself again. Yet each time, you last a little longer. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. Once, almost an entire night, though technically that was because everyone forgot the game and went home. Still, you count it as a victory. In your heart, you believe you are learning what it means to be an assassin, not the silence, not the shadows, not even the sneaking, but the persistence, the refusal to give up. Even when your knees are scraped, your nose is running, and your best hiding place smells strongly of pickled fish. And so, every game of hide and seek ends the same way, with you, small and stubborn, clutching your dull blade and staring at the world as though it owes you something. The other children cheer when they catch you. Your father cheers when you last longer. Your mother just sighs and wonders if she'll ever see you play like a normal child. But you know better. Normal children don't vanish into barrels. Normal children don't learn to brood before they can spell. Normal children don't mistake donkey sneezes for training. You are not normal. You are preparing. And even if you don't quite understand what for, the shadows are waiting. Your education does not begin with numbers, letters, or the careful tracing of saints' names on wax tablets. It begins with a bowl of soup. You are 5 years old, still struggling to tell left from right, and a man with a beard like tangled rope places a steaming bowl in front of you. "One sip," he says, "and you'll know if you live or die." You stare at the cloudy broth, flecks of green drifting across the surface like suspicious rafts. The smell is earthy, sharp, almost like grass clippings left too long in the rain. Your stomach growls because you skipped breakfast. You take a sip. Your tongue tingles, your lips sting, and your teacher grins like a wolf. "Mint," he says, slapping your shoulder hard enough to nearly knock you over. "Good for digestion. Won't kill you. Yet. This is poison class." Other children in the village sit on benches learning prayers and scratching out crooked letters while you are marched to the herb garden and told to lick leaves. Your classmates recite psalms. You recite symptoms: vomiting, dizziness, sudden loss of vision, foaming at the mouth. When you ask if there will be a test, the instructor laughs and says, "Oh, you'll know." The worst part isn't the tasting, though that is certainly unpleasant. The worst part is the guessing. They hand you a crumb of something brown, and you chew nervously. If it burns your tongue, it could be pepper, or it could be nightshade. If it makes you cough, maybe it's time, or maybe it's wolfsbane. You look up, eyes watering, and your teacher simply shrugs as if to say, only one way to find out. You begin to chew everything as though it might explode, even bread, especially bread. At home, your parents are proud. Your father beams whenever you identify a plant correctly, slamming his mug on the table and shouting, "That's my child!" Already knows the difference between basil and belladonna. Your mother nods solemnly, as if this is the highest praise one could ever earn. You, meanwhile, start eyeing every stew with suspicion. The carrots look harmless, but what if the parsnips are plotting? You stir slowly, watching for bubbles that feel less like cooking and more like sinister intent. Your siblings don't help. They think it's funny to sprinkle random herbs into your porridge and then sit back, waiting to see if you collapse. Once they pluck a mushroom from the yard and dare you to bite it, you refuse. They call you a coward. Later, the pig eats it and spends the night screaming at the moon. You feel vindicated, but also deeply unsettled. Lessons grow harder. The instructor sets out 2 bowls, one with harmless cabbage stew, the other laced with something that will only paralyze your legs for an afternoon. He asks you to pick. You hover over the bowls, nose twitching, sweat sliding down your temple. Finally, you point at the left one, sip, and pray. Your legs buckle. The instructor claps. "Good instincts, but poor execution," he says cheerfully, dragging you to a bench where you spend the rest of the day flopping like a fish. There is also theory, though it is hardly better. You copy diagrams of plants, drawing crooked leaves and labeling them with names you can't pronounce. Some of them look nearly identical, and when you ask how you're supposed to tell the difference, your instructor narrows his eyes. "That's the point," he whispers. You wonder if he ever sleeps, or if he simply spends all night laughing at children who mistake garlic for hemlock. One day he sends you into the woods with a basket and says, "Bring me 5 safe herbs and one that would kill me." You nod like you understand, though in truth, you only recognize dandelions. Hours later, you return with a basket of grass, weeds, and one mushroom you're fairly certain is evil. He looks over your haul, lifts the mushroom, and sighs. "This would kill me," he admits. But also the village, the animals, and probably the soil itself. Excellent enthusiasm, terrible precision. He tosses the basket into the fire. You stare as the mushroom hisses and pops, releasing smoke that makes the hens dizzy. The accidents pile up. You sneeze after brushing your nose with your hand, only to realize it was covered in crushed nettles. You drink water after class and discover your lips have turned blue because someone rinsed the cups in foxglove. Once you wake in the night, sweating and delirious, certain your blanket has been poisoned. It hasn't. But your dreams are filled with whispering herbs and a particularly smug carrot. Still, there are victories. You learn to crush a leaf between your fingers and smell whether it will heal or harm. You discover that parsley and hemlock, though similar, reveal their true nature in the stem. You even save your uncle when he mistakes a strange berry for a snack, slapping it from his hand and shouting, "Death fruit." He curses at you, but later admits you probably saved his life. Probably. By 7, you can prepare 3 kinds of antidotes, though they all taste like pond water. You can identify 20 plants, half of which would make your neighbors weep blood. You can slip a powder into a cup of ale without spilling a drop. And yet, despite all this, you still flinch every time someone hands you soup. The smell, the steam, the floating bits of green. It all feels like a test you are destined to fail. Your family eats happily, slurping away while you poke at your bowl with the caution of a condemned man. When they ask what's wrong, you mutter, "Trust issues." They laugh. You don't. And so your childhood is defined not by songs or stories, but by the constant awareness that your next sip could be your last. You memorize flavors, not as delights, but as warnings. Cinnamon is warm, Sage is safe. Fennel is fine. But one wrong sprig of monkshood, and you'll be twitching on the floor while your instructor scribbles notes about your technique. You lie awake at night, wondering if every taste, every smell, every swallow is preparing you for something larger, darker, inevitable. You begin to understand why assassins rarely smile. It's difficult to grin when every stew looks like a death sentence. And yet, when your teacher finally nods and says, "You'll live longer than most," you feel a small flicker of pride. A pride that tastes faintly of mint, burns like pepper, and leaves you wondering if you'll ever truly trust a spoon again. You learn very quickly that chores in your household are not about tidiness or obedience, but about preparation for an entirely different kind of life. Other children wake before dawn to sweep dirt floors or fetch water from the well, splashing half of it out on the way home. You wake to the scrape of stone against metal, handed a dagger still sticky from last night's training. Your task is simple. Sharpen until the blade can shave the hair from your arm. You try once, slice too close, and end up with a bald patch that your siblings laugh at for weeks. The chickens cluck outside, demanding feed, but you are not assigned to feed them. Your chore is to pluck feathers in silence, to practice patience and stealth. It sounds manageable until you realize the chickens are very much alive and very much unwilling participants. You creep toward one with hands outstretched, only to be met with a flurry of wings, a shriek, and a beak aimed directly at your nose. The lesson, apparently, is not about patience, but about the speed at which you can dodge poultry. Fetching water is not entirely off the list, but it is not for drinking or washing. You are told to fill a bucket, then walk home balancing it on your head while tiptoeing across a row of squeaky floorboards without making a sound. You fail spectacularly, the bucket tilting, the boards groaning like dying donkeys. Water splashes down your tunic. Your father sighs and mutters, "If you can't sneak past a plank of wood, how do you expect to sneak past a guard?" You don't have an answer, but you do have wet socks that smell like pond scum. Laundry day is no better. Instead of scrubbing tunics on stones like everyone else, you are told to wash your clothes in the river without leaving a single bubble of soap behind. Because bubbles draw eyes. You stare at the froth gathering against the current and wonder what kind of lunatic is watching river foam. Still, you try, beating your tunic until the water turns murky, only to discover that half the villagers upstream are pointing and laughing because your secret wash looks like a frog massacre. Meals become chores too. Not eating them. No, that would be simple. You are ordered to serve food silently, to place a cup by your teacher's hand without so much as a clink. The first time, the wooden mug tips, ale spills, and everyone stares at you as if you've just announced your intent to betray the entire guild. You try again, moving slower, slower still, until the mug rests on the table like a feather. They nod approvingly. You collapse in relief, then realize your stomach has been growling so loudly that even the goats outside look annoyed. The art of silence becomes its own form of torture. You are told to practice walking without noise, sitting without shifting, breathing without sounding like a winded ox. It goes well until hunger joins the lesson. You sit in the corner, legs folded, eyes shut, back straight, and your belly begins to sing. Not a gentle hum, but a full chorus of groans, squeaks, and wails. One noise is so loud that your instructor whips his head around, glaring at you as if you've betrayed centuries of tradition. You want to explain that it's not your fault, that your stomach has its own plans, but you stay quiet, clutching your middle, and hoping the gods invent bread before you faint. Sometimes chores involve animals, but never the easy ones. No sheep to herd, no goats to tether. You are sent to brush the horses without letting them notice, which is impossible because horses notice everything. You creep toward one, brush raised like a weapon, and it snorts so violently you fall backward into a pile of hay. Another time, you are told to collect eggs without waking the hens. By the end, You are bleeding from 3 scratches and clutching a single cracked egg that your instructor declares unusable. Cleaning weapons replaces cleaning floors. You polish blades until you can see your face in them, which is unfortunate because your face is sweaty, smudged, and increasingly tired of chores. You oil crossbows, testing the tension until your fingers are raw. You sweep arrowheads into neat rows, then trip and scatter them across the floor, crawling on hands and knees to gather them before anyone notices. They always notice. Even rest becomes a task. You are instructed to sleep with one ear open, to wake at the sound of a footstep or a breath. You practice by lying on the floor while others sneak around you. The first night you fail so completely that you wake to find your hair tied in knots and a potato balanced on your chest. By the 5th night you are jerking awake at the squeak of a mouse, trembling and half convinced the mouse has been hired as an assassin too. None of it feels like real life. Not the way you see it in other houses. Children laugh while chasing each other around the well. They throw sticks for dogs, splash mud, argue over stolen apples. Your chores leave you with cuts, bruises, and the lingering smell of iron and moss. When you ask why you can't just carry firewood or sweep ashes like everyone else, your mother pats your head and says, "Because your firewood will one day be a body, and your ashes will be secrets." Comforting. And yet, slowly, you change. Your feet grow lighter. Your hands steady. You can balance a cup without spilling, slip across floorboards without squeaks, hold your breath long enough to snuff a candle in the dark. But your stomach, traitorous and loud, remains your enemy. Every time silence falls, it fills it with a groan, a growl, a complaint that echoes louder than church bells on feast day. When you are scolded for ruining yet another lesson, you glance down at your belly, swear it smirks at you, and wonder if assassins are ever truly safe. Not from guards, but from their own hunger. So you sharpen blades instead of sweeping. You balance buckets instead of fetching them. You polish crossbows instead of scrubbing tunics. And every night, as you collapse into straw, you dream of one thing not taught in poison class, not whispered in silence training, not hidden in chores designed to shape killers. You dream of bread. Warm, crusty, safe bread. Bread that does not betray you. Bread that does not echo like a war drum from your hollow belly. And when morning comes and they hand you another blade to sharpen, you sigh and whisper to yourself, "At least the bread never tried to peck me." Puberty is never kind, but in your case it feels like an outright assassination attempt by your own body. Your knees ache like rusty hinges. Your voice cracks so badly that the baker's daughter laughs every time you say hello, and your skin erupts into small rebellions. No salve or ritual can quiet. Your masters tell you this is a phase, that pain builds character, but you are fairly certain the only thing being built is a mountain of humiliation. And then, just as you're wobbling between boy and man, they decide you're ready for your first assignment. Not a real mission, of course. No dukes to poison or rivals to silence. But a chicken. A practice kill. They place the knife in your shaking hand and gesture toward the bird like a priest offering a sacrament. The chicken looks at you with eyes that contain too much knowledge. It clucks softly, feathers ruffling, head tilting with the quiet confidence of something that has seen assassins come and go and live to tell the tale. You crouch, heart racing, sweat dripping into your eyes, and take a step forward. The bird sidesteps, casual as a drunkard weaving home. You lunge again, knife raised, and your foot catches on a root. You sprawl face first in the dirt, knife spinning end over end before landing harmlessly beside the chicken. It stares down at you, unimpressed, then pecks the handle as if mocking your lack of skill. The masters sigh, mutter about wasted training, and wander back inside to drink ale. You are left in the yard, covered in dust, while the chicken struts and circles around you like a victorious general. You imagine it crowing to its fellow poultry. "Behold, I have defeated the boy assassin. When you finally stagger up and shoo it away, it does not leave. It follows. Down the path, across the yard, even into the kitchen where your mother hisses at you to get the bird out before it defiles the soup pot. You push it out the door, slam the wood shut, and feel victorious until you turn and see it glaring at you through the window. Days pass. The chicken remains. You try ignoring it, but it scratches outside your door like an impatient creditor. You try bribing it with grain, only to discover that feeding it once means it now believes you are bound by eternal contract. You even attempt hiding in the loft, curling up in hay, but the bird appears minutes later, fluttering onto a beam above and showering dust onto your hair like divine punishment. At night, when the wind moans and the rafters creak, you swear you hear faint clucking in your dreams, as though it has infiltrated your mind. The villagers notice, of course. Children point and laugh when you walk by with the chicken at your heels. Old women shake their heads and mutter that it is a sign from the saints. A few men in the tavern start calling you Featherfoot, which sounds like an insult but somehow spreads until even your instructors use it. Your reputation as a would-be assassin is already fragile. Now it is tethered to a bird that refuses to die. Training becomes unbearable. You crouch in the shadows, trying to practice blending into the dark, but the chicken waits just beyond the corner, clucking loudly enough to alert every guard in 3 kingdoms. You attempt to climb silently up the training wall, only for the bird to flap clumsily after you, scratching its way onto the ledge and perching like a feathery overseer. Even poison class is disrupted when it hops into the herbs, scattering deadly leaves and pecking suspiciously at a vial of something that could kill half the monastery. One instructor clutches his chest and declares you cursed. The worst part is that you begin to feel guilty. The bird was supposed to be dead. Its continued existence is a daily reminder of your failure, but also of your mercy, however accidental. You start leaving crumbs from your bread crusts, muttering under your breath that it doesn't mean anything, that you're only keeping it quiet so the others won't notice. But one evening you find it roosting near your bed, feathers puffed, eyes closed, clucking softly in its sleep. Against your better judgment, you feel a flicker of fondness. The next morning, when one of your brothers threatens to wring its neck, you nearly stab him with a spoon. Still, the mockery spreads. Assassin of none. Someone snickers as you pass. Another suggests you hire the chicken to do your jobs, since it seems better at surviving than you are at killing. Even the priest smirks when he sees it pacing beside you during Mass, muttering that perhaps it's your spirit animal. You would laugh too if you weren't so busy trying to keep the bird from hopping onto the altar. Your body continues to betray you with growth and clumsiness. One day your knees ache so badly you stumble while running drills, landing flat on your back while the chicken lands neatly on your chest, crowing triumphantly. Another time your voice cracks mid-oath, sending your comrades into howls of laughter while the chicken contributes with a perfectly timed cluck. By now you are convinced it waits for these moments, savoring them, savoring you. One evening, after a particularly humiliating day in which you tripped twice, missed every knife target, and dropped your food bowl in front of everyone, you sit outside with the chicken beside you. The stars wheel above, cold and endless, and you mutter, "You're never leaving, are you?" The chicken blinks slowly, leans down, and pecks a bug from your sleeve. You take that as confirmation. And so adolescence passes, not with glory, not with triumph, but with aching knees, cracked voice, and the steady companionship of a bird that should have been stew long ago. You are mocked, you are teased, you are followed by feathers wherever you go, yet secretly, you are never alone. The chicken watches you, judges you, reminds you daily of your first mistake, and perhaps, just perhaps, keeps you human, in a life determined to carve away everything but steal. You fall asleep to the sound of soft clucking. It echoes in your dreams, like laughter, like warning, like friendship. And though you'll never admit it, not to your masters, not to your family, not even to yourself, you are strangely grateful. It starts the way all reputations do, with whispers that grow legs, learn to walk, and eventually sprint faster than you ever could. You hear it first at the well, two women drawing water and pretending not to stare. One mutters, "That's the boy with the rope." The other nods gravely, as if you've been caught tying knots around the moon. Soon after, a shepherd points you out to his son, shaking his head. "Don't play near him. He'll strangle your goat for practice." The goat looks at you with wide, alarmed eyes, and you feel the weight of an accusation you've never even earned. Other children your age get kind nicknames. Marta, for example, is praised for her fast hands at weaving. Tomas is admired for calming even the most stubborn mule. You're the one who carries string like it's a weapon. A harmless bit of twine in your pocket becomes evidence. A coil of rope on your shoulder marks you guilty before trial. No matter what you do, someone finds a way to turn it into proof that you are lurking a few inches away from murder. When invitations go around for midsummer dances, yours is suspiciously absent. The messenger swears he left it under your door. Your mother insists she saw him. Yet somehow the folded parchment never appears, as though swallowed by the shadows you've been accused of keeping company with. Later, you watch from your roof as the other youths gather in the square, wreaths of flowers on their heads, songs weaving into the warm night air. They laugh and stumble and make fools of themselves in front of potential sweethearts, while you sit alone with only the judgmental chicken for company. It clucks once, low and disapproving, as if reminding you that it too has a better social life than you. The problem is not helped by your training. Every time you try to walk through the market, you forget how normal people move. Instead of strolling casually, you drift too quietly, too smoothly, and suddenly a potter drops his wares because you appeared beside him like a phantom. A girl carrying eggs shrieks when you brush past her without sound, and the eggs splatter across the stones. The baker's wife scolds you for scaring everyone half to death. "Why can't you walk like a normal boy?" she demands. You open your mouth to answer, but what do you say? "Sorry, I'm being groomed for a profession that thrives on unnatural silence." That sort of confession doesn't win friends, so the whispers grow. At the tavern, men laugh nervously and say you'll poison the ale someday. At the church, old women cross themselves when you kneel too close, muttering that the saints won't protect those who skulk. Even children you once played with now scatter when you appear, squealing as if you're a ghost come to drag them into a cellar. One bold boy throws a pebble at you and yells, "Murderer!" His mother pretends not to see. You could chase him, but instead you turn away, shoulders heavy with the weight of what everyone has already decided you are. The worst of it comes during festival time. You try to join the crowd, weaving between stalls, the smell of roasted meat and honey cakes teasing your nose. But everywhere you go, conversations falter. The lute player strums a sour note when he notices you lingering. A woman selling ribbons quietly packs up her stall rather than risk you buying one. You pause at the edge of the dancing circle, half hoping someone will call you in. But the circle shifts conveniently closed, leaving no space for you. When the blacksmith's daughter laughs too loudly, you realize she's laughing at the very idea of you holding someone's hand. Rumors become details, details become facts, and facts harden into stone. They say you once killed a cat for blinking at you the wrong way. They say you practiced strangling scarecrows in the night. They say you were born with a dagger in your crib. Each story grows bolder, more ridiculous, until you almost want to add your own. "Yes," you imagine saying, "and I once garroted the moon for rising too early. At least that would make you interesting." Instead, you say nothing. Silence is safer, even if it sharpens the blade of gossip. You begin to notice small shifts in your family too. Your mother still loves you, but she watches you longer than before, as though checking for signs of darkness. Your father avoids speaking of your training in public, changing the subject quickly when neighbors ask. Even your younger sister hesitates to walk alone with you after dusk, glancing nervously at the rope tied to your belt. When you finally ask what's wrong, she shrugs and says, "They all think you're dangerous." Then she adds, almost gently, "And maybe you are." It eats at you during sleepless nights. You lie awake listening to the wind, to the restless shuffle of animals, to the distant laughter of others your age. You wonder if they're right. You've been taught to kill since you could crawl. You know poisons by taste, blades by weight, shadows by heart. You could end a life faster than most could end a prayer. And yet, you have not. The chicken lives. The goat lives. The children who taunt you still breathe freely. The only thing dead is your reputation as anything but a threat. And so you drift on the edge of the village, belonging yet not belonging, feared but not respected. You sharpen your knives alone. You practice walking without sound, though the silence it creates feels less like mastery and more like loneliness. You watch the others dance and drink and stumble through the awkward joys of youth, while you stand apart, invisible, until someone remembers to whisper. In their eyes, you will never be the boy who might have baked bread, or sung, or danced clumsily with a girl who laughed at your missteps. You will only ever be the boy with the rope. It is unfair, but it is also inevitable. Once people decide what you are, they rarely allow you to be anything else. And so, your life begins to settle into its role. The shadow in the corner, the silent figure by the wall, the name that makes mothers clutch their children closer. You are young, but your future has already been written in rumors and muttered prayers. And no matter how many times you tell yourself you are not yet the monster they imagine, you cannot help but wonder if, given time, you will become it. The chicken clucks beside you, smug as ever. At least someone still believes you're worth following. The assignment comes with no ceremony, no parchment stamped with wax, no whispered blessing. Just your mentor shoving a finger toward the hills and saying, "The man up there stole sheep. Go fix it." You wait for clarification. Fix it could mean many things. Build him a fence? Convince him to return the sheep with a heartfelt speech? No. The glint in your mentor's eye says exactly what it always says. This is not about words or fences. This is about proving whether you can stop being a boy with daggers and start being an assassin with purpose. The problem, as always, is that no one has prepared you for the practical details. They never say how you're supposed to actually find a sheep thief. The hills are wide and rolling, full of rocks that look suspiciously like men hunched over in cloaks until you walk closer and realize they're just rocks with a flair for drama. You crouch in grass taller than your head, heart pounding with the idea that every shadow might hide your quarry, only to discover it hides mostly rabbits. One rabbit stares at you so long and so accusingly that you nearly apologize for existing before remembering that the rabbit is not your target. After several hours of creeping, muttering to yourself, and stepping into boggy patches that smell like expired soup, you finally find him. Not from skill, not from cunning, but because he sneezes so loudly that even the sheep look offended. There he is, trousers patched with clumsy stitches, face as red as an overripe beet, arms wrapped around a ewe like it's a long-lost lover. He looks less like a criminal mastermind and more like someone who got lost on the way to sobriety. You draw your blade and prepare to act, and then the sheep sees you. No one warned you about sheep. No one mentioned that their eyes are tiny moons filled with cold judgment, or that their skulls are suspiciously sturdy, or that they seem to sense when violence is about to happen and take it personally. This one stomps a hoof, glares, and lowers its head with the confidence of a knight preparing for a joust. The thief barely has time to shout, "Wait," before the animal charges straight into your ribs. You crumple like bad parchment. The dagger flies from your hand and lands in the mud, blade first, where it sticks like a mockery. The thief drops the ewe and stumbles backward, unsure whether to run or help. The sheep does not hesitate. It rams you again, this time in the thigh, leaving you limping before you can even rise. You stagger, clutching your leg, while the animal circles you with the smug patience of a seasoned warrior. By the third impact, you're on your knees, gasping for breath and reconsidering your entire career path. The sheep stands over you, victorious, its wool ruffled like a banner of war. You swear you see it smirk. The thief, emboldened by his ally, snatches up a stick and waves it like a sword. "Begone, demon boy," he cries, though his voice cracks so badly it sounds more like a child begging not to do chores. Still, it adds insult to injury. You retreat. Not a tactical retreat, not a calculated move, but a desperate hobble toward the nearest slope. The sheep follows halfway, then stops, as if declaring the hill its kingdom and you an unworthy trespasser. You slip in mud, tumble once, land in a puddle that soaks you to the spine, and finally drag yourself home under a sky that looks like it too is laughing at you. When you limp into the village, wet, bruised, and smelling faintly of livestock, the first person you see is your mentor. He raises an eyebrow, waiting for the tale of your triumph. You open your mouth, then close it. You consider lying, saying the thief escaped, or that the sheep were bewitched, or that you were outnumbered by wolves. But honesty slips out instead. The sheep won. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't even look surprised. He just nods once, the way a man nods at the inevitability of rain. "Good lesson," he says. That's all. No comfort, no sympathy, just a grim satisfaction, as though being bested by a farm animal was a milestone he expected you to cross eventually. You want to argue. You want to shout that assassins shouldn't have to duel livestock, that dignity should matter, that a sheep should never count as a lesson. But your ribs ache every time you breathe, and your pride is too bruised to muster more than a glare. That night, as you lie on your straw bed, you imagine the sheep back on its hill, standing beneath the moonlight like a crowned champion. Perhaps the thief is still beside it, feeding it stolen grain, whispering thanks to his woolen protector. You picture the sheep telling stories to other sheep, tales of the strange boy with knives who was no match for hooves and skull. The flock bleats in laughter, and you bury your face in your pillow to escape the imagined sound. What stings most is not the pain in your ribs, not the limp that will last for days, not even the humiliation of retreat. What stings is your mentor's calm, the way he seemed almost pleased that you failed. "Good lesson," he said, as if being trampled into the mud by a sheep was part of the syllabus. Maybe at Island. Maybe every assassin has to lose first, to know the taste of dirt, to learn that the world is less about blades and more about the creatures stubborn enough to resist them. Still, you cannot shake the humiliation. Tomorrow, when the villagers gossip at the well, you know the story will spread. The assassin boy was beaten by a sheep. They'll chuckle. They'll nod, they'll add flourishes. Perhaps by next week, you'll be rumored to have fled from 10 sheep, or an entire flock, or a lamb still damp from birth. The story will grow until you are less assassin and more cautionary tale. You close your eyes, vowing never to fear a sheep again. But in the dark, every creak of the cottage sounds like hooves, and every dream fills with wool and glaring eyes. You wake with a start, sweat on your brow, and know the truth. The sheep has already won. Puberty arrives not as a gentle transition, but as a siege. Your voice doesn't so much deepen as it cracks like old wood under pressure, one moment squeaking like a startled mouse, the next booming like you swallowed a church bell. Your body grows in uneven spurts, arms too long for your sleeves, knees that clatter together like bad drumsticks, a neck that feels permanently tilted because you keep trying to look mysterious in doorways. And through all of this awkward remodeling, you are also expected to keep sharpening daggers and practicing strangulation techniques like some sort of hormonal ghoul. The other boys talk about girls in hushed, nervous tones, giggling about braids or ankles or whichever body part they're currently obsessed with. You, meanwhile, are stuck in lessons about pressure points and poison tolerances, which makes your small talk unusual at best, alarming at worst. When you finally summon the courage to approach a girl in the village square, you mean to say something charming, something harmless, something that will not result in immediate rejection. What actually comes out is, "Do you prefer garrotes or crossbows?" She blinks, tilts her head, and runs to tell her friends that you smell like vinegar and probably keep a collection of skulls under your bed. She's not wrong about the vinegar. Your mentor insists it builds character to bathe in it occasionally, especially when combined with crushed mint leaves and something he calls assassin's musk. The result is not musk. It's more like pickled despair. You trail a scent that makes dogs bark and mothers pull their children closer. You try covering it with herbs, but then you just smell like vinegar with oregano. One boy suggests standing downwind permanently. You try. The wind shifts. It never helps. Despite the smell, you persist in your hopeless attempts at romance. At the harvest dance, you linger at the edge of the crowd, daggers tucked under your cloak, watching as the fiddler screeches out something vaguely musical. You step toward the girl who once complimented your handwriting, rehearsing a line in your head. Would you like to share a turnip pasty? Simple, safe, food-based. But as you open your mouth, your voice betrays you, cracking mid-sentence so it sounds like you're proposing marriage or a duel. She laughs, not kindly, and walks away with the miller's apprentice, who has the twin advantages of steady hands and no visible weapons. Every crush becomes a dossier in your mind. You note their movements, their favorite benches, the way they twirl their hair when bored. It's not love so much as surveillance with extra hormones. You want to compliment someone's smile but end up remarking on how quietly they walk, which sounds less romantic and more like you're planning to follow them into an alley. Rumors spread. Don't talk to him, he's memorizing your gait. They're right, but it stings nonetheless. The physical changes don't help your image. Pimples sprout across your forehead like angry constellations, each one burning brighter after a training session in the smoke-filled hall. Your arms, once skinny, now flail with sudden strength you don't know how to control. You try flipping a practice dagger dramatically and end up slicing your sleeve open in front of everyone. The boys laugh until your mentor glares, but the girls laugh too, and no amount of glaring can save you from that humiliation. Food becomes a problem. Your appetite doubles, maybe triples. You eat whatever's put in front of you: porridge, stale bread, questionable stew with floating objects no one identifies. And still you're hungry. You raid the kitchen after midnight, only to be caught gnawing on a carrot like a guilty rabbit. An assassin must control his body, your mentor says, shaking his head. But even he looks nervous when you devour half a loaf of rye before dawn. Sleep is worse. Your dreams are fevered messes of daggers and dances, sheep charging at you again, and the girl from the square, who now always appears holding a noose and asking if you've washed. You wake tangled in your blanket, drenched in sweat that smells faintly of vinegar, and stumble into training bleary-eyed. Your peers joke that you look haunted. You want to protest, but it's hard when they're right. Puberty also delivers its cruelest companion: clumsiness. Your once practiced silence deserts you. You trip over door thresholds, stub your toes on rocks, and slam your elbow into every doorway like the village itself is conspiring against your career. You fall from rooftops you used to scale with ease, crashing into hay bales that burst dramatically, as if the hay is mocking you. Every mistake earns you another bruise, another scar, another round of laughter from the apprentices who aren't currently shaped like collapsing furniture. And yet, beneath all this awkward chaos, something dangerous stirs. Your shoulders broaden, your grip steadies. One day, you hold a dagger, and it no longer feels like play acting. It feels like extension, like possibility. You catch your reflection in the river and, for a moment, you almost look like the assassin your parents whispered about when you were born. The pimples, the smell, the cracked voice. It's all still there, yes, but also a glimmer of menace, sharp and growing sharper. You don't notice it, but the villagers do. They stop making eye contact. The baker's wife stops handing you free crusts. Children dart away from you in games of chase, too convinced you'll win. Even the girl who mocked your smell now crosses herself when you walk by, which is not the romance you wanted, but it is attention. And in a twisted way, that's enough. Still, late at night, you lie awake listening to the crickets, wondering if there's a world where you smell like roses, where you can ask someone to dance without sounding like you're offering them execution. You imagine yourself holding hands in the meadow, not a dagger. You picture laughter that doesn't come at your expense. It's a soft dream, fragile as cobweb, and it dissolves the moment you hear your mentor bark at you to get up. Because assassins don't dream, they sharpen, and so you do. But even as you polish your blades, even as you practice your silence, you cannot shake the memory of her words. You smell like vinegar. They echo in your skull like prophecy. You vow one day you'll smell of something else. Blood, maybe. Smoke, perhaps. Anything but vinegar. But for now, you stink. Your voice squeaks, and your heart keeps trying to assassinate itself whenever she looks your way. Puberty has come, and it has come armed. You are told that assassins must learn to live by the rhythms of darkness, that the night is your true home, and the stars your only companions. It sounds poetic in the mouth of your mentor, but when you actually try staying awake past midnight for the first time, the poetry evaporates quickly. The night is not a friend. It is damp, cold, and full of noises that make your hair prickle, even though most of them turn out to be rats. You sit cross-legged in the courtyard, knife across your knees, trying to look brooding, but after half an hour your eyelids droop, and your head tips forward like a pigeon nodding at crumbs. The first hour is manageable. The moon is bright, the air sharp, and you convince yourself that you are growing stronger with every blink you resist. But then the owls start. You thought owls were wise, silent creatures, patient watchers of the night. They are not. They are furious gremlins with wings. One dive bombs your head, talons grazing your scalp, and you yelp so loudly that even the dog chained near the stables stirs and growls. The owl perches on a beam above you, glaring as though you've broken some unspoken rule about who gets to sit outside at this hour. From then on, every rustle of its wings feels like a threat. You hunch your shoulders and try to ignore it, but the owl is relentless. By the second hour, you are convinced the bird has sworn a personal vendetta. The third hour introduces you to the true enemy of nocturnal living, candles. You light one, thinking it will make you look studious, mysterious, perhaps even terrifying in the flickering glow. Instead, it sputters in the damp air, dripping wax down your fingers and attracting every insect in the county. Moths batter themselves against the flame, beetles crawl across your sleeve, and once a spider lowers itself directly into your cup of water, twitching its legs as if mocking you. When you blow the candle out in frustration, the darkness that follows feels heavier than before. You realize the flame wasn't keeping you safe, just distracting you from how alone you are. By the fourth hour, exhaustion gnaws at you like a patient wolf. You walk laps around the courtyard to stay awake, but your legs ache and your feet slap the stones too loudly. You sit again, pinching your arm every time your head nods. Eventually, desperate, you climb into the nearest tree. The bark scrapes your hands, the branches wobble under your awkward limbs, but you perch there, convinced that the precarious height will keep you alert. It does. For about 3 minutes. Then your eyes close against your will, and you slump sideways, wedged between 2 branches, drooling down your tunic. Dawn finds you this way. The villagers passing on their way to the fields stop and stare. One boy points and shouts, "Look, the assassin naps like a pigeon." Laughter erupts. Someone throws a crust of bread at you, and it bounces off your head before falling to the dirt. You jolt awake, almost tumble from the branch, and scramble down with all the grace of a sack of turnips. By the time your feet hit the ground, the story has already spread. You are the assassin who falls asleep in trees. Your mentor doesn't scold you. That would almost be merciful. Instead, he just raises an eyebrow and says, "The night does not forgive weakness." You want to argue that the night also doesn't forgive boredom, or hunger, or owls that seem to despise your very existence. But you swallow the words. Instead, you nod grimly, rubbing the bark scratches on your arms as if they were medals earned in some private war. The second attempt goes no better. You decide to practice shadowing people in the dark, trailing a villager from the tavern back to his cottage. You step lightly, breath shallow, every sense sharpened. For the first time, you feel like maybe you understand what it means to be a predator of the night. Then your stomach growls, long and low, echoing across the empty street like the roar of some tragic beast. The villager spins around, sees you crouched by a barrel, and screams. By the time you stumble back to your own bed, the whole village is awake, and your mentor is waiting with crossed arms. Stealth, he says, requires silence. You mumble something about turnip stew and vow never to eat again. The third attempt ends in the graveyard. You perch on a headstone, trying to appear as ominous as possible, when a gust of wind knocks your hood back and reveals a face blotchy with fatigue and pimples. A group of girls collecting water jugs from the wells see you and burst into laughter. One calls you the ghost who snores. You try to straighten, to look terrifying, but your balance fails and you topple backward into a patch of nettles. Their laughter follows you home, sharp as any blade. Night after night, you repeat the routine, trying to grow accustomed to hours that stretch endlessly. You learn that every creak has its own voice, every gust of wind its own trick. Cats slink across the rooftops like they own the darkness, and dogs bark at shadows that are not you but feel like they should be. You learn, too, that the human body is not built for this. Your head throbs in the mornings, your eyes sting like you've rubbed onions into them, and your legs tremble on the training field. The others mock your sluggish steps, whispering that the assassin boy is dying from lack of sleep. You consider stabbing them, but even that requires energy you no longer have. Still, slowly, something shifts. You stop jumping at every owl screech, though you still hate them. You learn to ration candles, to let your eyes adjust until the darkness feels less like a weight and more like a cloak. You practice listening until you can tell the difference between a rat scuttling and a human shifting their weight. You fall asleep less often, though the fear of being discovered again keeps your back straight and your jaw clenched. The humiliation remains, but beneath it, a strange endurance begins to grow. And yet, no matter how many nights you spend in silence, one truth remains. Sleep is for other professions. Farmers need it for their dawn, bakers for their ovens, priests for their prayers. You have been denied it, traded it for shadows, bruises, and the mocking laughter of villagers who find you snoring in a tree. You thought the night would be a companion, but it is only ever a test. And it is a test you will take again, and again, and again, until the stars themselves know your failures by heart. The owls never forgive you. The villagers never forget. And still, you rise when the sun sets, clutching your daggers, dragging your weary body into the dark, because this is what you were told you must become. A shadow, a phantom, a sleepless thing, even if the truth is simpler, uglier, and far less glorious. You are tired. So very, very tired. Your apprenticeship begins not with ceremony, not with oaths of loyalty whispered beneath the moon, but with an old man chewing on a piece of bark and spitting splinters at your boots. He is introduced as your mentor, though everyone speaks his name with the sort of reverence reserved for saints or curses. You expect someone tall, terrifying, cloaked in darkness. Instead, you are greeted by a stooped figure who looks like he might lose a duel with a gust of wind. His back curves like a bowstring that has given up. His beard is long enough to braid into a rope. He has 3 fingers missing, 2 from the left hand, 1 from the right. And yet he insists he can still tie knots better than you ever will. Lad, he says, squinting at you with watery eyes, though he calls every living thing lad. You've heard him address cows this way, chickens, even once a patch of particularly suspicious moss. The shadows are your blanket. He pauses for effect, waiting for you to nod. You nod, mostly because you don't know what else to do. He smiles, revealing teeth that are more memory than substance. Good lad. Now fetch me a blanket. It's bloody cold. Training under him is a paradox. He is ancient, brittle, and smells faintly of boiled onions. Yet he moves in bursts of speed that defy explanation. One moment he is shuffling along, leaning on his stick as though the world itself weighs too much, and the next he has vanished, appearing behind you with a wheeze that sounds like laughter. He smacks you in the back of the head with the stick and mutters, "Dead again, lad." You are tempted to remind him that he just called a goat lad 5 minutes ago, but you know better. His lessons are maddeningly vague. "Become the night," he whispers, crouched on a wall with knees that should not allow crouching. You ask how. He shrugs. Just do. Another day he instructs you to move like water, which makes you attempt a flowing sort of dance that earns you a cuff on the ear. Not like a drunk river, he grumbles. You are left standing in the dirt, arms flailing, wondering if drowning would count as passing. Meals with him are worse. He claims food dulls the senses, so he serves boiled nettles and something he calls essence of crow, which tastes suspiciously like muddy water. You choke it down while he slurps contentedly, explaining how hunger sharpens instinct. Hunger, in your case, just sharpens your hatred for him. By the second week, you fantasize about bread with the same intensity others reserve for romance. And yet, despite his riddles, despite his smells and his wheezing laughter, he teaches you more than you realize. He shows you how to breathe in rhythm with the wind, how to place your weight so lightly that grass barely bends beneath you, how to listen for the difference between silence and the silence that hides something alive. He demonstrates how to hold a blade, not as a tool but as a question, waiting for the right answer. Even as you mutter about his nonsense, you find yourself copying him, mimicking his stances, echoing his pauses. Slowly, the shapes of his madness begin to form something that feels like skill. But for every lesson learned, there is another that makes no sense at all. He insists you spend an entire night staring at a wall to study patience. You do, until your eyelids flutter and your head slams into the stone. He calls it progress. Another time he tells you to sneak past him and steal a coin from his pouch. You spend 3 hours crawling in circles, only to discover he never had a coin to begin with. When you complain, he cackles until he coughs, hacking into his sleeve and muttering, "That's the real test, lad. Never trust anyone, not even old bones like me." It is say, the villagers watch your apprenticeship with amusement. They see you stumbling after him through the square, tripping over your own boots while he glides noiselessly on legs that should have collapsed years ago. They hear him bellow, "Lad," at you from rooftops, from trees, from barrels where he inexplicably hides, his voice rattling like dry beans in a jar. They shake their heads and whisper that you're doomed to be nothing more than his shadow, never an assassin in your own right. You pretend not to care, though their words gnaw at you. The worst moments are the nights he insists you keep watch with him. You sit on the edge of the roof, cold seeping into your bones, while he mutters stories half lost to time. He tells you of jobs where the target was a drunk who walked into the river before he could be killed, of noblemen so fat they could not fit through their own windows, of assassins who failed not because they were clumsy but because they fell in love. You listen, half asleep, shivering under the stars, and though you would never admit it, you find yourself fascinated. His stories are tangled with lies, But somewhere in the mess of wheezing laughter and forgotten names, you glimpse the weight of a life spent in shadows. You want to hate him. You want to dismiss him as a relic. But each time he disappears and reappears behind you, each time he smacks you with the stick and declares you dead, each time he shrugs off your frustration with a crooked grin, you know there is something you need from him. He is not the assassin you imagined, not the fearsome phantom of your childhood stories. He is older, pettier, stranger, and yet he survives. That alone feels like a lesson worth learning. So you fetch him blankets when he asks, because he is always cold. You listen to his rambling nonsense, because sometimes buried inside it is the truth. You watch his missing fingers as he knots ropes tighter than yours, and you wonder how much of yourself will be missing by the time you reach his age, if you reach it at all. He calls you lad every day, and though you roll your eyes, though you mutter under your breath, though you sometimes wish you could strangle him with his own beard, a secret part of you feels a flicker of pride each time, because for all his faults, for all his riddles and coughs and onion-smelling cloaks, he is your mentor, and you are his lad. You would still prefer an actual blanket. Nicknames are supposed to be marks of honor, proof that you've earned a place among killers whispered about in taverns. You imagine yourself as the Phantom, perhaps, or the Black Shroud, something with weight. Something that would make villagers cross themselves when they heard it muttered in the dark. Even the Silent Blade would have worked, though you are still perfecting the art of not tripping over your own boots. You dream of the day your mentor announces it, a moment of gravitas, your identity sealed with awe. Instead, you sneeze. It happens during training, of course. You are crouched in the shadows, trying to master the art of holding your breath until you dissolve into nothingness. Your mentor lurks nearby, waiting to declare you invisible or dead. The dust from the rafters drifts down, tickling your nose, and despite every ounce of willpower you can summon, you let out the loudest, most pathetic, "Eh-ha-ha ninji chew" the world has ever heard. Birds scatter from the roof. The dog in the yard starts barking. Your mentor sighs deeply and mutters, "Well done, Snuffles." At first you think it's temporary, a passing insult, a joke for the evening. But apprentices are like wolves. They smell weakness and feast upon it. By dawn, everyone is calling you Snuffles. You try to fight it. You insist the sneeze was strategic, a distraction technique, a feint to lure enemies into thinking you're vulnerable. No one believes you. They laugh so hard one boy nearly falls off the training wall. The name sticks faster than burrs to your tunic. Your enemies catch on too. During a sparring match, one opponent holds up his hands and mocks, "Don't sneeze on me. Snuffles, I might melt." You lunge at him with more rage than skill, which earns you another cuff from your mentor. "Anger is noise," he wheezes. "Noise is death." You nod bitterly while the others snicker. Later that night, while sharpening your blade, you mutter the name under your breath like a curse, hoping one day you'll carve it out of existence. The problem is, the nickname travels faster than your reputation. You overhear villagers whispering it when you pass. The baker's daughter, who once giggled at your pimples, now calls out, "Good evening, Snuffles," as though she is offering you bread. Children run up to you in the square, clutching their noses, faking sneezes before fleeing in shrieks of laughter. Even the priest coughs into his sleeve during confession, hiding a smirk. You imagine yourself looming over him in the dark, dagger poised, and all he would do is say, "Bless you." You did not hass, and well be an ass. You attempt damage control. You try to force a new nickname into existence by whispering to others that you should be known as the Shadow Wolf. They laugh. You try the Knife Without Echo. They laugh harder. You even carve the initials T.P. for the Phantom into your training dagger. But when someone asks what it stands for, you panic and blurt out, "Turnip Protector." By evening you are mocked as both Snuffles and Turnip Protector, which feels like a fate worse than death. Your mentor, of course, finds it all endlessly amusing. He calls you Snuffles with such casualness that you begin to suspect he has forgotten your real name entirely. "Snuffles, lad," he says while handing you a bowstring. "Snuffles, lad," when he sends you to gather herbs. Once, when you trip during a mission drill, he doesn't even bother to say, "Dead again, lad." He just shakes his head and mutters, "Snuffled yourself." You wonder if he wakes at night, chuckling into his blanket. The nickname begins to shape you in ways you didn't expect. Enemies don't take you seriously. During a chase, you corner a thief against the wall, blade gleaming in moonlight, only for him to laugh and shout, "Snuffles is after me." He then barrels past you while you stand frozen in fury. Later, when you report the failure, your mentor shrugs and says, "At least he ran." Fear is fear, even if they laugh on the way out. It is not the kind of encouragement you crave. Still, something strange happens over time. The name spreads, yes, but it also lingers. Everyone knows it, and by extension, everyone knows you. The villagers who once pretended you didn't exist now greet you with grins, mockery softened by familiarity. Apprentices who once looked down their noses now slap your back, laughing, "Good work, Snuffles," when you land a blow. You hate it, but you also see the way it binds you to them. You are no longer just the awkward boy skulking in shadows. You are Snuffles, the one everyone remembers, for better or worse. And though you swear to the saints you will outgrow it, though you promise yourself that one day you will earn a name draped in fear and blood, there is a part of you that suspects this will follow you forever. You imagine yourself at 50, cloaked in black, slipping into a nobleman's chamber, only for him to gasp and whisper, "Oh no, it's Snuffles." You stab him anyway, but it doesn't feel like victory. That night, as you lie awake, staring at the rafters where dust still drifts, you sneeze again, quietly this time, almost politely. No one hears, but the name still echoes in your head, clinging like cobwebs. Snuffles. It is not the nickname you wanted. It is not the nickname you deserve, but it is yours. And the shadows, it seems, will not let you forget it. The first thing you learn about sneaking is that the stories lied. Ballads describe assassins gliding through alleys as silent as mist, their cloaks trailing behind them, daggers flashing only when necessary. They do not mention the mud. The mud is everywhere, thick, sticky, ankle-deep in places, clinging to your boots like a needy child. You take one cautious step, and the ground answers with a squelch so loud it might as well be a trumpet blast. You freeze, heart hammering, convinced the entire village has turned its head. In reality, only a nearby pig looks up, unimpressed, before returning to rooting in the same muck you just stepped in. But the damage is done. Your illusion of silence has burst like a soap bubble. You try again, choosing a path along the wall where the shadows look friendlier. The mud waits for you there too. It does not matter how carefully you place your foot, how lightly you balance your weight. The earth gurgles with glee each time, a wet chorus announcing your presence. Somewhere in the distance, a dog begins to bark. Another joins in, then another. Soon, half the village's mutts are baying, as though you've broken into their homes and insulted their ancestors. You crouch in the dark, cheeks burning, praying for the dogs to stop. They do not. The chickens are worse. Chickens sleep in baskets and rafters, piled together like feathered coals. They are supposed to rest through the night, heads tucked under wings. But the moment you pass too close, one snaps awake, tilts its head, and lets out a cluck that might as well be a battle cry. Others join in, fluttering wildly, scattering feathers that stick to your damp cloak. By the time you reach the end of the alley, you are covered in fluff and surrounded by noise. If stealth is an art, you are finger painting in the dark with mud and feathers. You consider climbing instead. Roofs must be better than streets, surely. But the tiles are slick, the beams uneven, and your hands are still raw from rope drills. The first time you try, you slip halfway up and land flat on your back in a puddle. The sound echoes so loudly it startles a cat, which leaps from a barrel, yowling, and knocks over a stack of pots. The crash wakes 3 households. A window creaks open, and a man's voice calls into the night. "Who's out there?" You hold your breath, plastered to the ground, mud soaking through your tunic. A pause, then the man mutters, probably snuffles, and shuts the window again. Your mentor insists this is all part of the lesson. "Adapt, lad," he wheezes when you return covered in filth. The mud teaches humility. You suspect the mud is teaching you hatred instead. You spend an hour scraping your boots with a stick, each clump falling with a thud that reminds you of failure. Your cloak will never be the same. It smells faintly of manure now, no matter how long you leave it hanging in smoke. The next night, you prepare differently. You bind your boots in cloth to muffle the squelch. You carry no lantern, trusting your eyes to adjust. You even rub ash on your face, though this makes you sneeze and curse your nickname anew. At first, it seems to work. You creep past the tavern, past the well, each step softer than the last. The shadows cling to you like loyal companions. You feel, for the first time, like a true assassin, until the cloth on your boot unravels, tangles around your ankle, and sends you stumbling face first into another puddle. The puddle is deeper than expected. Mud fills your mouth. You gag and spit, flailing quietly but not quietly enough. A donkey tied nearby brays in alarm, tugging at its rope until the post wobbles. The noise reverberates through the street. Lights flicker in windows. You crawl out on hands and knees, dripping mud, and slump against the wall. From somewhere above, an owl hoots. You are sure it is laughing. By the third attempt, you stop caring about elegance. You accept that each step will squelch, that each animal will protest, that the village itself seems designed to expose you. Instead, you move quickly, darting from shadow to shadow before the echoes of muck can betray you. It is not graceful, but it works. Sort of. You are spotted less often, though this is partly because people grow tired of looking out their windows when they hear noises at night. They assume it's just you again, floundering in the mud like a half-drowned rat. Still, lessons emerge. You learn where the ground is firmest, which stones rise above the muck, which paths curve away from the animal pens. You learn to time your steps with the barking of dogs or the rush of wind, masking your sound in theirs. You learn to embrace the stink, because there is no way to avoid it. The mud becomes part of you, clinging beneath your nails, soaking your clothes, marking you forever as someone who will never be mistaken for clean. Romantic, it is not. There are no songs about assassins dragging mud trails into taverns, no ballads of killers slipping on chicken droppings. But you live in the reality, not the song. And the reality is filth. By the time you return to your mentor, exhausted, stinking, dripping brown water across the threshold, he just nods and mutters, "Better." You cannot tell if he means better than yesterday or better than death. You collapse into straw, too tired to ask. In your dreams, you imagine cleaner streets, dry alleys, a city where shadows are not interrupted by puddles. But dawn always arrives with the stink still in your nose and mud caked on your boots. You rise, stretch, and prepare to do it all again, because this is your life. Not silent, not glorious, just wet. The shadows do not help. They only make the mud look deeper. The invitation arrives folded into a triangle of parchment, slipped under your door with a smear of wax that smells faintly of tallow and secrecy. You unfold it, expecting orders, maybe a target, perhaps even another humiliating assignment involving chickens. Instead it says, "Guild dinner, attendance mandatory." You blink at the words, confused. Dinner? You have been told assassins thrive on hunger, that meals dull the blade, that desire for bread is weakness. Now suddenly, there is a party? You hold the parchment up to the light, certain it must be a trap. But your mentor only wheezes from his chair and says, "Put on your best black, lad." Your best black looks exactly like your worst black, because everything you own is black. You shine your boots until the mud stains look merely gray and tug on your least torn tunic. The mirror shows a lanky figure who smells faintly of vinegar and anxiety. You try to slick your hair back, but the water in the basin makes it stand up like startled hay. In the end, you decide that assassins aren't meant to look handsome. They are meant to look like shadows. Unfortunately, you look less like a shadow and more like a scarecrow that has recently fallen into a ditch. The guild hall is lit with torches, their flames guttering against stone walls. Long tables stretch down the room, and every assassin you've ever seen, and some you wish you hadn't, are gathered, each one dressed in black, as though mourning fashion itself. For a moment, you think they all look impressive, until you realize they look exactly the same. Cloaks, hoods, belts, boots. It's like a funeral for individuality. You catch one apprentice whispering to another, "Do you think she'll notice I'm wearing double black?" And the other replying, "You mean gray?" They glare at each other, but no one dares laugh. You sit where your mentor shoves you, wedged between a man whose breath smells of onions and a woman polishing a crossbow as if daring anyone to ask why. The table creaks under the weight of trenchers, loaves of bread, hunks of meat, and of course, soup. The bowls are all identical, steaming, their surfaces rippling with suspicious intent. You hesitate, spoon in hand. Your mentor leans close and mutters, "Eat fast, lad," before someone decides to have fun. You don't ask what he means. You already know. The first spoonful burns your tongue, but that's not the problem. The problem is the coughing fit that erupts 3 seats down, followed by someone collapsing face first into their bowl. Gasps ripple down the table, though half of them sound staged, like a chorus rehearsing. "Poison," someone declares, pointing at the soup as if it hadn't been obvious. Then laughter breaks out, grim and sharp. "Just a joke," the poisoner calls from the far end, raising his goblet as though this were the height of wit. The victim lifts their head, groaning, eyes bloodshot, and slams a fist on the table. "You use too much wolfsbane," they croak. Everyone chuckles. You stare into your bowl, horrified, certain you've swallowed your last meal. Conversations swell in pockets, each one darker than the last. To your left, 2 assassins argue over the best way to strangle a man without creaking the chair. To your right, a woman brags about poisoning an entire wedding feast with nothing but mushrooms and misplaced generosity. Across the table, someone is carving elaborate shapes into their bread knife, muttering about artistry. You try to join in by mentioning your experience with mud, but the table goes silent for a heartbeat before moving on without you. Apparently, mud is not impressive in this crowd. The awkwardness deepens when the toasts begin. One by one, assassins raise their cups, offering grim little speeches. To shadows, to silence, to knives that never miss. Each toast is followed by a chorus of murmured approval and long gulps of wine. When it's your turn, your palms sweat. You stand, clear your throat, and squeak. 2, not dying? A pause. Then someone at the far end snorts, and laughter ripples through the room. Your mentor pats your arm and mutters, "Could have been worse, lad." You sit, wishing the floor would swallow you. As the evening drags on, the air thickens with smoke, spilled wine, and whispered threats disguised as jokes. An apprentice challenges another to balance a dagger on his nose, which ends with blood dripping into the soup. Someone else sets fire to a cloak for entertainment. You do your best to fade into the background, chewing bread slowly, hoping no one notices that you've barely touched your soup. Unfortunately, the man beside you leans over and says, "You gonna eat that?" You slide the bowl toward him, grateful for the escape. He downs it in 3 gulps, then promptly keels over sideways. The hall erupts in laughter again. By the time dessert arrives, tin, a tray of honey cakes so oversalted they might be preserved for centuries. You are exhausted. You've endured too many jokes that weren't jokes, too many stares that felt like daggers themselves. Your mentor seems unbothered, picking his teeth with a sliver of bone and humming an old tune. When you ask if all dinners are like this, he shrugs. Once saw a man garrote a roast goose for practice, he says. Still tasted fine. At the end of the night, when the torches burn low and the floor is slick with spilled wine and soup, the assassins file out in silence, each one slipping back into the night as though the dinner never happened. You follow, weary, still clutching your untouched dessert. Behind you, the poisoned man groans from the floor, ignored by everyone except a passing cat that licks his sleeve. You return home smelling of smoke and vinegar, your cloak sticky with honey, your stomach empty, but your mind full. You expected wisdom from the gathering, some sense of belonging, a glimpse into the brotherhood you are meant to inherit. Instead, you found chaos, dressed in black, laughter sharper than blades, and soup you will never trust again. As you collapse into bed, your mentor's words echo in your head. The shadows are your blanket. You pull your cloak tighter, shivering despite yourself. You would prefer an actual blanket and a dinner that doesn't try to kill you. The crossbow is introduced to you like some holy relic. Your instructor drags it out from a chest with exaggerated reverence, setting it down on the table as if it were a crown or a saint's skull. You expect something sleek, elegant, balanced in its menace. Instead, you are handed a contraption so heavy it nearly tips you forward the moment you grip it. The wood is dark and splintering, the iron mechanisms creak like an old man's knees, and the string hums with the threatening energy of a beehive. This, the instructor says, eyes glittering, will extend your reach. You nod, though at the moment it feels more like it will extend your spine directly into the dirt. You lug the weapon outside, staggering under its weight, and plant your feet before the target. A simple straw man propped up in the yard, grinning faintly with its stitched-on mouth. Your peers watch from the fence, whispering bets about whether you'll even manage to load it. You jam the bolt into place, tug the string back with every ounce of strength in your body, and finally, sweating and trembling, you raise the weapon. The sight alone is enough to make you feel powerful. For one glorious heartbeat, you imagine yourself a shadow on a rooftop, enemies quaking as you take aim. Then you fire. The bolt whizzes past the target with all the accuracy of a drunken goose and thuds into a nearby cabbage patch. The unlucky vegetable bursts apart in a spray of green leaves, collapsing into itself like a fallen soldier. There is a beat of silence, followed by the sound of your instructor's laughter, dry, rasping, but unmistakably amused. A promising start, he says, patting your shoulder as though you have discovered a new form of assassination. Cabbage work is an underrated art. The apprentices howl with laughter. Someone starts calling you the cabbage killer, and you know instantly that this will haunt you for weeks. You glare at the ruined vegetable, wishing it had at least looked dignified in its demise. But no, it lies there, shredded, humiliated, mocking you with every limp leaf. You imagine villagers whispering about the assassin who stalks produce stands by night, slaughtering lettuce and radishes with merciless precision. Not exactly the reputation you wanted. Determined to recover, you reload. This time, the bolt jams halfway, catching your fingers in the mechanism. You yelp, shake your hand, and nearly drop the entire crossbow. Your instructor smirks. Patience, lad. The crossbow is not a tool, it's a companion. Treat it poorly, and it will betray you. You mutter something about betrayal already being accomplished, but he doesn't hear, or pretends not to. By the third attempt, your arms are quivering from the effort of holding the weapon steady. Sweat drips into your eyes, blurring the target. You squint, breathe, pull the trigger, and the bolt clatters to the ground 2 feet in front of you, having slipped loose before the string released. The apprentices roar. One nearly falls off the fence, clutching his stomach. Another flaps his arms, mimicking a cabbage's dying gasp. Your cheeks burn so hot you're sure they'll catch fire. Your instructor, however, remains infuriatingly calm. He stoops, picks up the fallen bolt, and presses it back into your hand. Again. The word is not encouragement, it is command. You sigh, reload, and try again, and again, and again. By the 10th shot, you manage to graze the edge of the straw man's arm, tearing a bit of stuffing free. The apprentices boo. The instructor nods, as though you've just toppled a king. See? Progress. Your progress comes at a cost. The string smacks your forearm so often it blossoms with bruises. Your shoulder aches as though you've been carrying sacks of stone for days. Your hands blister from the rough wood. At night, you collapse into bed with your arms trembling, unable to even lift your cup of water without spilling it. But your mentor insists this is how strength is forged. In pain, in failure, in cabbage casualties. One afternoon during practice, the crossbow's recoil knocks you flat on your back. You lie there staring at the sky while your peers cackle and your instructor peers down with faint disapproval. You must learn to flow with it, he says. The crossbow is not just weapon, it is rhythm. You want to ask if rhythm usually leaves people sprawling in mud, but you bite your tongue. You've learned enough not to provoke a man who once claimed he killed a duke by sneezing. The cabbage incident, however, refuses to die. Word spreads beyond the training yard. Villagers begin teasing you in the square. A farmer waves a head of lettuce at you and calls, "Guard your crops, folks. Snuffles is on the prowl." You grind your teeth and imagine stabbing him with a carrot. Children throw cabbage leaves at you when you pass, cackling as though reenacting your great victory. Even the tavern cook mutters, "Careful with the stew, assassin boy might take offense to the greens." Yet slowly, painfully, you improve. You begin to understand the balance of the weapon, the steady draw of the string, the way your breath must match the release. You strike the target's chest once, then twice, until the straw man is bristling with bolts like an oversized porcupine. You begin to feel that rush again, that fleeting sense of power, of control. For a moment, you are not Snuffles or the cabbage killer. You are simply accurate, deadly, even. Still, the memory of that first kill lingers. No matter how many times you hit the mark, you know there is a cabbage somewhere whispering your shame. And deep down, you suspect your instructor is right. This, too, is a lesson. That sometimes the first life you take will not be human, but something softer, greener, and profoundly less threatening. You clean your weapon at night, arms aching, ears still ringing from laughter, and whisper to the wood, "Never again." But you know the truth. The cabbage will always be your first. The scroll arrives with none of the grandeur you imagined. No blood-red seal, no ominous wax imprint of a dagger dripping shadows. Just a grubby piece of parchment shoved into your hand by a half-asleep apprentice who mutters, "It's yours now, Snuffles," before shuffling off to find breakfast. You unroll it with trembling fingers, heart pounding with the weight of destiny, and read the target's name, a baker. That's it. No nobleman plotting treason, no general leading armies, no baron oppressing peasants. Just a man whose greatest crime seems to be kneading dough at ungodly hours. You blink at the parchment, then at your mentor, who wheezes into his mug of nettle tea. "Bread kills slower than poison, lad," he says. "But it kills all the same." You tell yourself it will be simple. A test, nothing more. After all, how hard can it be to eliminate a man whose daily routine consists of flour, yeast, and getting up before the sun? You spend the day preparing with what little dignity you can muster. You sharpen your daggers until they gleam, practice your stealth until even the rats barely notice you, and rehearse grim one-liners in case you need to sound impressive. You settle on, "Your final loaf has risen." It feels clever enough, though you worry about delivering it with a straight face. Night falls. The village sleeps. You creep toward the bakery, hood pulled low, steps light as whispers. The air smells of smoke and warm crusts, a cruel distraction for someone who hasn't eaten since noon. You press your back to the door, steady your breath, and slip inside. The darkness greets you with sacks of grain, wooden shelves, and the faint glow of embers still alive in the oven. For a moment, you allow yourself to feel triumphant. This is it, your first real mission. You are an assassin now. Then something moves. The baker is still awake, broad-shouldered, apron dusted with flour like snow. He's rolling out dough with the precision of a soldier polishing armor. His arms bulge with the kind of strength earned from decades of kneading, and his eyes, sharp, alert, entirely unfooled, lift to meet yours. "You're not here for bread," he says, voice low and flat. He doesn't scream. He doesn't call for help. He just sets down the dough, wipes his hands, and reaches for the largest rolling pin you've ever seen. You lunge, blade flashing, but he moves with surprising speed, swinging the pin like a club. The wood cracks against your forearm, numbing it instantly. You stagger, drop the dagger, and barely dodge as he swings again. You've fought apprentices, sparred with masters, even battled a sheep, but never have you faced an opponent so furious, so unrelenting, and so covered in flour. Each strike comes with a grunt. Each grunt sends panic down your spine, and soon you are ducking behind sacks of grain, gasping for air, wondering if this is what the guild meant by adapt. The fight descends into chaos. You slash at the air, missing entirely, while he hurls half-formed loaves at your head. One smacks your temple with the force of a rock. Stars burst in your vision, and you realize with horror that his bread is not metaphorically hard. It is literally a weapon. You stumble backward, coughing as he kicks a cloud of flour into your face. The powder fills your nose, your throat, your eyes. You hack and sneeze, blind and choking, until your blade clatters uselessly to the floor. By the time you stagger outside, you are a disaster. Your cloak is white with flour, your hair plastered to your head with sweat, your face streaked like a failed attempt at disguise. Behind you, the baker slams the door, muttering something about "damn kids" before returning to his dough. You limp into the alley, clutching your bruised arm, and collapse against the wall. This was supposed to be simple, easy, a rite of passage. Instead, you've been beaten senseless by carbohydrates. When you return to the guild at dawn, still dusted with flour, the apprentices burst into laughter. One throws a stale crust at you, yelling, "Look out, he's armed." Another demands to know if the baker at least spared you a pastry. Your mentor doesn't laugh, but his eyes twinkle in the dim light. "Bread wins more battles than blades," he says sagely. You glare, but he only shrugs, adding, "Consider it a lesson." You want to scream, to demand a proper target, but the words dissolve on your tongue, because deep down, you know he's right. The parchment with the baker's name remains crumpled in your pocket. No one tells you to finish the job. Perhaps they expected you to fail. Perhaps the assignment was never about killing him, but about discovering that even the simplest foe can knock you flat if you underestimate them. Or perhaps the guild just needed a laugh at your expense. Whatever the truth, the baker still lives, still bakes, still arms himself with rolling pins and loaves dense enough to crack skulls. Days later, you pass the bakery in daylight, hood pulled low, praying he won't notice you. But he does. He steps out, dusted in flour as always, and meets your gaze. He says nothing, just holds up a loaf the size of your head. His eyes glint with quiet warning. You hurry on, pretending not to see, pretending not to remember how that same flour once filled your lungs and nearly ended your career before it began. At night, lying awake, you replay the fight again and again, trying to imagine what you could have done differently. Strike faster? Aim lower? Bring fire instead of steel? No matter how you rewrite it, the result is always the same. flour in your mouth, bread to the face, humiliation, clinging like yeast that refuses to die. Your first job was not glory. It was not triumph. It was not even survival in the traditional sense. It was retreat, humiliation, and the knowledge that the world is armed with weapons you never expected. You thought you were born for shadows and blood. Instead, you were defeated by a baker. And the worst part, you can still smell the bread. Warm, rich, impossible to forget. You hate it. You crave it. And you know the taste of your failure will always rise with it. You dream of roasted meats glistening with fat, of pies that steam when you cut into them, of honey dripping from fresh bread so soft it sighs in your hands. The feasts are endless in your imagination. Golden turkeys, wheels of cheese, pitchers of ale. But when you open your eyes, reality is always the same. A wooden bowl with dried peas that look suspiciously like gravel, a crust of bread so stale you could shingle a roof with it, and water that tastes faintly of iron and despair. This is the assassin's diet. It is not meant to comfort you. It is meant to remind you that life is cruel, and so should you be. Your guild leader insists hunger is good for you, sharpens the senses. He growls as he gnaws on a strip of dried meat that may once have been part of an actual animal, but now resembles leather beaten against a wall. A full stomach makes a dull knife. He says this with the authority of someone who has clearly forgotten what a full stomach feels like. You nod, chewing your stale bread, though the only thing it sharpens is your desire to stab the cook. Meals are communal, if one can call them that. Apprentices gather around long tables, bowls clattering, spoons scraping, the air filled with the grinding sound of teeth battling rock-hard bread. Conversations are muted because talking requires energy, and energy is a rare commodity when your body is living off peas and fumes. Once, someone dared to ask if we might eat something green, something fresh, perhaps even, saints forbid, a vegetable that hasn't been dead for a season. The guild leader glared so fiercely the boy nearly swallowed his own spoon. Greens are for goats, he said. The matter was never raised again. Sometimes, when the storeroom runs low, meals get creative. By creative, of course, they mean desperate. A rat roasted on a spit one evening was presented as forest fowl. You swore you wouldn't touch it, that you had dignity, that assassins deserved better. But the smell of sizzling fat betrayed you, and before you knew it, you were chewing something stringy and bitter, trying to convince yourself it was chicken. It was not chicken, it was rat. You know this because halfway through the meal, someone pulled a tail from between their teeth and fainted. And yet, the guild insists this is part of your training. Hunger, they claim, keeps you awake, keeps you lean, keeps your mind sharp enough to cut through fear. You suspect it just keeps everyone irritable. You have seen men start fights over the last crust, women nearly duel over the final pea at the bottom of a pot. Once, 2 apprentices brawled for so long over a scrap of dried meat that when it finally flew into the fire, neither had the strength to cry. The worst is when the guild leader tries to wax philosophical about food. Bread, he declares, slamming his fist on the table, is life. But stale bread is death, and death is what we bring. You stare at your crust, unsure whether to nod or throw it at his head. Another time, he insists that chewing on dried peas is a metaphor for patience. You chew, you wait for the flavor, but the flavor never comes. That is life. That is the assassin's path. By then, you've nearly cracked a molar and wonder if the assassin's path includes paying for dentistry. Despite the bleak meals, the kitchen is never quiet. There is always someone arguing about whether the stew is made from goat or mystery. Someone else is trying to trade their bread for a chance at an extra spoonful of peas. The cook, a man whose apron smells perpetually of smoke and onions, is both feared and hated. His specialties are gruel that could double as mortar and meat pies filled with substances no one dares identify. When pressed, he shrugs and says, "It's protein." That's not reassuring when you find feathers in your teeth. Still, you adapt. You learn to dunk your bread in water to soften it enough not to chip a tooth. You learn to chew peas slowly, to savor the faintest hint of flavor, to ignore the crunch when one shatters like a stone. You even learn to cook for yourself when no one is looking, robbing the pantry of onions, boiling them into something resembling soup. Your mentor catches you once and simply nods. "Poison begins with flavor, lad," he says. You decide not to ask whether he means all food is poison or whether you've just doomed yourself by seasoning with salt. And then there are the feasts you never reach. Sometimes, when missions take you past taverns, the smell of roasting meat follows you like a ghost. You imagine stepping inside, ordering a meal, eating until your stomach protests. But you never do. To be seen enjoying food like an ordinary villager would be to admit you are still human, still bound by weakness. So you pass by, drooling, stomach growling, while your cloak absorbs the aroma until you want to bite it. Your hunger becomes a companion, one you cannot silence. It prowls with you on rooftops, growls with you in alleys, keeps you awake long after missions end. It is never sated, never full. Your guild leader calls this discipline. You call it misery. But somewhere in that gnawing emptiness, you admit there is truth. Hunger does make you sharper. Sharper in your eyes, your ears, your movements. Sharper in your temper too. But perhaps that is part of the lesson. At night, you dream again of feasts, of food piled so high it could bury you. You dream of reaching for it, tearing into it, eating until you are whole. But every time, just as you raise the first bite to your lips, you wake to the taste of stale bread in your mouth. The guild says, "This is strength." You suspect it's just starvation, dressed up as wisdom. It begins in the most ordinary way, which is perhaps why it feels so dangerous. You are crouched on a rooftop, watching the flicker of lanterns in the square below, when you hear laughter, real laughter, not the sharp-edged kind assassins use when someone trips into a pit. It is softer, warmer, the sound of someone who hasn't yet learned to hide joy. You peer over the edge and see them, hair catching the lantern light, eyes bright even in the dark, carrying a basket too large for their frame but smiling as if the weight is nothing. You tell yourself you are only observing, only practicing your craft, but your chest tightens in a way no lesson ever prepared you for. The next day, you see them again, and the day after that. Soon your routes are chosen not by orders or strategy, but by the faint hope of crossing their path. You learn their gait, the rhythm of their steps, the way they pause to adjust the basket strap before climbing the hill. It is surveillance, you tell yourself, professional observation. But when your mentor mutters that you're staring like a moon-drunk cow, you know it's something else entirely. They notice you, eventually. No one is supposed to notice you. You are trained to be the shadow, the silence, the ghost no one remembers. Yet one evening, while you lean against a wall pretending to sharpen a dagger you don't need to sharpen, they walk up, tilt their head, and smile. "You're always lurking," they say. "Do you ever laugh?" You want to reply with something sharp, something mysterious, something befitting an assassin. Instead you sneeze. Loudly, they laugh again. And just like that, you are lost. Conversations sprout like weeds in the dark. At first it's small talk, weather, gossip, complaints about bread that could break teeth. But then it grows. You talk about childhood fears, about how you sometimes dream of running away, about the absurdity of a life built on shadows. They listen, nodding, eyes soft. When they speak, it is with honesty so disarming it cuts deeper than any blade. You find yourself leaning closer, wishing the night were longer, wishing you didn't smell faintly of vinegar. For a time, you believe it might last. You slip away from training, risk punishment, just to stand beside them at the well or share stolen apples under the eaves of the tavern. You begin to imagine impossible futures. A cottage, a quiet life, no more daggers under your pillow. You tell yourself this is weakness, but it feels like the first strength you've ever chosen for yourself. Then the scroll arrives. It's delivered the same way as always, parchment folded and sealed, slipped into your hand with no warning. You break the seal, eyes scanning the name, and your heart collapses. It is them. No explanation, no reason, just their name, written in ink that feels colder than steel. For a long moment, you cannot breathe. The world tilts. Your stomach lurches as if you've swallowed poison. You tell yourself it must be a mistake, a cruel test, but deep down you know the guild makes no mistakes. That night, you meet them as usual. They smile, unaware, speaking of ordinary things. Bread, neighbors, the sound of owls at dusk. You nod, but your hand is heavy around the dagger hidden beneath your cloak. Every laugh they give you is another blade twisting in your chest. You imagine raising the dagger, swift and silent, as you've been trained. You imagine completing the job, returning to the guild with the scroll and no questions asked. Instead, you sit frozen, words choking in your throat, every part of you rebelling against what you've been told to do. They notice your silence. "What's wrong?" they ask, voice low, eyes searching your face. You shake your head, force a smile, mutter something about being tired. Inside, you are unraveling. You picture yourself as two people, one holding the dagger, ready to strike, the other clinging desperately to the warmth of their smile. You cannot reconcile them. You cannot breathe. Hours pass like minutes. When you finally rise, you almost stumble. They touch your arm, steadying you, and the kindness of it nearly breaks you. You murmur goodbye, voice cracked, and vanish into the night before you betray yourself with tears. The shadows swallow you, but they offer no comfort. Back at the guild, your mentor waits. His eyes are old, sharp, knowing. He says nothing, only glances at your empty hands, at the unmarked scroll still clutched in your grip. You expect punishment, perhaps even death, but he only wheezes and mutters, "Every assassin learns." Then he turns away, leaving you to collapse into yourself. You lie awake for hours, dagger resting on your chest, the name echoing in your mind. You imagine 100 futures, all of them impossible. You wonder if the guild will send someone else, if their smile will disappear tomorrow under another's blade. You wonder if you will ever forgive yourself, no matter what happens. You do not cry. Assassins do not cry. That's what you tell yourself, as your throat burns, as your chest heaves, as the night stretches endlessly. But in truth, you do, quietly, with your face buried in the shadows. Because for once, the dagger in your hand is lighter than the weight in your heart. It begins with a honk. Not the polite kind you hear when geese shuffle past a pond, but the furious, throat-rattling kind that sounds like a demon choking on its own rage. You are on your way back from a routine errand, minding your own business, when the goose appears, white feathers gleaming in the sun, beady eyes full of hatred, wings spread as though it's twice its actual size. You freeze. The goose does not. It charges, hissing like a kettle, flapping so violently it stirs dust into your eyes. Instinct takes over. You draw your dagger and flail, shouting something undignified, until the goose lies still at your feet, neck bent at an unnatural angle. Villagers gather, staring. No one cheers. One child whispers, "Why did he kill it?" Another says, "It was just protecting its nest." You sheath your blade with shaking hands, but the damage is done. The story spreads faster than fire. By evening, everyone knows. The assassin who couldn't silence a baker has now murdered a goose. Not a man, not a thief, not a noble, a goose. Some say it was monstrous. Others say it was cowardly, and a few insist the bird had it coming. But none of it matters. What matters is that the moment you step into the guild hall, someone calls out, "Goose killer," and laughter ripples like arrows through the room. You try to ignore it, but ignoring assassins is like ignoring wasps. They sting harder when you pretend they're not there. The worst offender is a fellow apprentice named Corin. He is everything you are not. Tall, graceful, smug. His cloak falls perfectly, his daggers always gleam, and he somehow manages to smell faintly of pine instead of vinegar. When he calls you goose killer, he does it with such relish you feel as though he's stabbing you with the word itself. He mimics your frantic honking, struts around the yard flapping his arms, and once even brought a roasted goose to supper just to wink at you while biting into it. You grit your teeth so hard your jaw aches. Eventually, you snap. "Duel," you say one night, voice shaking but loud enough for everyone to hear. The hall goes silent. Corin raises an eyebrow, smirking. "Over a goose?" he asks, and the apprentices roar with laughter again. You flush, but the challenge is already made. He shrugs. "Fine. Tomorrow." You spend the night practicing, swinging your blade until your arm burns, whispering threats to shadows, imagining Corin sprawled in the dirt, begging for mercy. You fall asleep still clutching your dagger, only to dream of the goose. It honks, it flaps, it chases you across endless fields, its beak snapping at your heels. You wake in a sweat. Half-convinced feathers are stuck to your tongue. The duel takes place at dawn, as tradition demands. Apprentices gather in a circle, eager for blood, or at least entertainment. Your mentor leans against a post, coughing into his sleeve, muttering, "Don't embarrass me, lad," which does nothing for your nerves. Corin enters the circle with a flourish, spinning his blades as though they are extensions of his hands. You step in awkwardly, knees trembling, mud sticking to your boots. Someone honks from the crowd, and laughter erupts again. The fight begins. You lunge, too fast, too desperate. Corin sidesteps with insulting ease and raps you across the back with the flat of his blade. The apprentices cheer. You snarl, swing again, only to have your strike parried and your balance stolen. You stumble, trip, and land on your knees. Corin grins, bowing mockingly. "Is this how you fought the goose?" he asks. The crowd howls. Humiliation fuels you. You rise, charge, and for one glorious moment, you nearly catch him off guard. Your blade grazes his sleeve, nicking the fabric. The gasp from the crowd feels like victory. But then Corin twists, spins, and the next thing you know, your weapon is on the ground and his blade is at your throat. "Yield," he says softly. You do, because you have no choice. The apprentices erupt, chanting "Goose Killer," louder than ever. Some even flap their arms. You stand there, throat burning where his blade had been, fists clenched so tightly your nails dig into your palms. Corin bows again, enjoying every ounce of your humiliation. "Don't worry," he says. "At least you're good at poultry." That night, you lie awake listening to the guild hall's snores, staring at the rafters. The laughter still rings in your ears. You try to tell yourself it's just a name, just a duel, just another failure in a long string of them. But when sleep finally drags you under, the goose is waiting. Its eyes glow red, its honks echo like war drums, and its wings blot out the sky. You run, but it follows, always. The goose haunts your dreams. And worse, so does the laughter. The noble summons you with the kind of flourish reserved for minstrels and dogs. His messenger arrives at the guild hall with a ribbon note and a sneer so smug you want to trip him down the steps. Still, a job is a job. You accept, imagining the pouch of gold that will soon clink in your pocket, the feast you'll buy with it, maybe even a night in a bed without straw stabbing your back. You picture yourself returning triumphant, stomach full, cloak heavier with coin. For once, You allow yourself to believe in reward. The job itself is almost too easy. The target is a steward accused of skimming money from the noble's coffers. You watch him drink at the tavern until his head lolls, follow him down the alley where shadows are thick, and press a blade to his ribs with all the grace of your training. He collapses in the muck without even drawing his dagger. You drag him out of sight, wipe your blade, and return to the noble's manor, expecting triumph. The noble greets you in silk, lounging on a chair that looks more expensive than everything you've ever owned combined. He listens to your report with bored disinterest, picking at his nails with a jeweled dagger. When you finish, he claps once, like a lord dismissing a hound. "Excellent," he says. "Payment will be arranged." He gestures vaguely toward a servant, who scuttles away and returns not with gold, but with a sack of turnips and one old boot. The boot has a hole in the sole and smells faintly of cheese. At first you think it's a joke. You wait, forcing a laugh, expecting the real reward to appear. But the noble waves his hand and says, "That will suffice. Be grateful. Not everyone earns the honor of my patronage." His smile is a thin blade, his eyes full of contempt. You stand there, sack of turnips heavy in your arms, humiliation burning your throat. For a heartbeat, you imagine drawing your dagger again, this time pressing it to his perfumed neck. But assassins don't have unions. They don't have rights. They don't have anyone to complain to but shadows. So you bow stiffly, mutter something that might pass for gratitude, and leave. Outside, the servants snicker as you pass. You stomp through the mud, clutching your pitiful payment, wishing for once that you had been born to any other profession. Farmers at least get to keep their grain. Bakers, their bread. You get a sack of root vegetables and footwear that looks like it lost a fight with a dog. Back at the guild, the apprentices swarm like vultures. "What'd you get, Snuffles?" One jeers. "Bet it's cabbage again." You drop the sack on the table, turnips rolling out in every direction. The laughter shakes the rafters. Someone picks up the boot and holds it aloft like a trophy, announcing, "Behold the assassin's bounty." You bury your face in your hands, wishing you could disappear into the wood. Your mentor shuffles over, eyes crinkled with amusement. He picks up a turnip, weighs it in his palm, and says, "Could be worse. Once I was paid in goat teeth." He takes a bite, crunching loudly, and adds, "At least these you can eat." You want to argue, to scream that assassins are worth more than produce, but the words catch in your throat. He is already wandering away, muttering about stew. That night, you stare at the turnips piled in the corner of your cell. They are lumpy, dirt still clinging to their skins, and smell faintly of the barn. You boil one over a small fire, but it softens into mush that tastes like disappointment. You gnaw on it anyway, because hunger doesn't care about dignity. The boot sits beside you, leather cracked, hole yawning. You consider throwing it in the fire, but some stubborn part of you keeps it. Maybe one day it will serve as proof. This is what you were given for risking your life. Word of your humiliation spreads through the village. Children pelt you with turnips when you pass. Merchants ask if you'll work for carrots next. Even the tavern keeper smirks when you enter, sliding you a bowl of stew and saying, "On the house. Payment for all your hard work in agriculture." You eat in silence, cheeks burning, the laughter buzzing in your ears louder than flies. You vow never to be cheated again. You practice looking more menacing in the mirror, sharpening your dagger until it gleams, rehearsing demands for gold with a voice full of thunder. But the next time a noble offers you a job, you still bow, still nod, still take the parchment without protest. Because the truth is plain. Assassins don't get to choose. You take what you are given, even if it's vegetables. Especially if it's vegetables. And so the turnips remain, feeding you for weeks, each one a bitter reminder that your life is worth less than a coin. The boot remains too, tucked in the corner like a joke you can't quite throw away. Sometimes you dream of filling it with stones and hurling it at the noble's smug face. Sometimes you dream of gold, though the sound of clinking coins has grown faint in your imagination. Mostly, you dream of feasts again. Roasted meats, steaming pies, honey dripping from bread. But when you wake, it's always the same. A cold turnip, waiting to mock you. You grow up thinking assassins are feared, whispered about with awe in smoky taverns, their names carried like curses on the wind. You imagine villagers shrinking back at your passing, doors shutting, children hushed into silence. Instead, you step into the square one morning, hood drawn tight, cloak swishing dramatically, only to be met with the clatter of rocks striking your boots and the unmistakable sound of someone emptying a chamber pot out the window. The contents splatter across your hood before you even manage your first menacing stride. You freeze, dripping, while the villagers burst into laughter. Fear is not the emotion you inspire. It is contempt. It turns out that no one likes assassins. Not the peasants whose neighbors vanish in the night. Not the nobles who hire you and then pretend you don't exist. Not even the dogs, who bark as though you carry sausages strapped to your legs. Walking through the village becomes a gauntlet. Insults hurled like stones, actual stones hurled with better aim. Women spit in the mud as you pass. Old men shake their canes and shout about honor. A boy once ran up just to honk in your face, clearly remembering the goose incident. You tell yourself you don't care, but each jeer carves itself into your ribs. The worst are the cries of murderer, shouted with such conviction you nearly believe them. Yes, of course, that is what you are. It is the title stamped onto your life like a brand. But the way they spit it, as if you chose this path willingly, as if you could have simply decided to become a baker or a blacksmith instead, it stings in ways you weren't prepared for. Sometimes you want to shout back, "It's just a profession," the same way someone might defend carpentry or cobbling. But assassins don't argue. Assassins endure. So you keep walking, hood low, teeth grinding, chamber pot dripping. Even when you're not in the village, you feel the hatred following you. Farmers glare when you cross their fields, clutching pitchforks a little tighter. Merchants demand double payment, certain you'll slit their throats if they don't. Even priests turn their eyes away, mumbling half-hearted blessings that sound more like curses. It's as if your very presence contaminates the air. You imagine carrying a sign that says, "I don't want to kill you," but you know no one would believe it. Then, there are the bounty hunters. Apparently, being an assassin puts you on the list of people worth killing too. You don't even know who pays them. Angry relatives, vengeful lords, or maybe just the guild itself testing your reflexes. But suddenly, you can't sit down for a mug of ale without some brute lurching toward you with a knife. You fight them off, yes, but it wears on you. The constant suspicion, the knowledge that even when you're not working, someone is working on you. It makes every shadow heavier, every creak of the tavern floor suspicious. Your mentor shrugs when you complain. "We kill, lad. Others try to kill us. Balance." He says this while gnawing on a bone, unconcerned. You want to argue that balance feels different when you're the one dodging chamber pots, but he only coughs and laughs. Better to be hated than ignored. You're not sure he's right. Ignored sounds peaceful. Ignored sounds like sleep without daggers under your pillow. Sometimes you fantasize about walking through the square without jeers, about people nodding respectfully, maybe even thanking you for your work. You imagine applause when you return from a mission, gifts of bread and wine, a feast in your honor. But that dream crumbles quickly, replaced by reality. Villagers booing, rotten apples splattering against your hood, children chanting "goose killer," until you want to melt into the mud. The hatred seeps into everything. When you enter a tavern, conversations stop. When you try to buy cloth, the merchant pretends it's all sold. When you sit near the fire, people shuffle away, leaving a gap as though your cloak carries disease. You tell yourself you don't care, that an assassin doesn't need friends, that shadows are your only company. But then you remember laughter, real laughter, not cruel, and you ache with something that feels suspiciously like longing. One evening, after another day of rocks and insults, you finally snap. You whirl around in the square, dagger flashing, and shout, "It's just a profession." Your voice echoes off the stone walls, silencing the jeers for half a heartbeat. Then, someone throws a cabbage at your head. The crowd roars with laughter, louder than ever, and you slump, humiliated, muttering to yourself, "You don't try again." Some truths cannot be shouted into existence. At night, you lie awake, listening for footsteps outside your door, waiting for the inevitable bounty hunter, the inevitable villager brave enough to try. Your dagger rests on your chest, but sleep rarely comes. When it does, you dream not of glory or triumph, but of being chased endlessly, the word murderer ringing in your ears, chamber pots pouring from every window. You wake choking on the stink. Though the room is clean, you wanted to be feared. Instead, you are despised. And somehow, despised feels lonelier. The scroll said, "Eliminate the Lord of Hymir," and you told yourself this would be your moment. Not a goose, not a baker, not another humiliating errand that left you with turnips. A lord. An honest to saints noble. The kind of target that makes bards whisper your name in trembling ballads. You sharpened your blades until they gleamed like moonlight. You practiced your steps in the courtyard, imagining the way shadows would swallow you whole. You even rehearsed a line to hiss before the kill. "The last sip of wine shall be your last breath." It sounded elegant when you whispered it to the rats. Hymir's manor is glowing with feasting light when you arrive. Music drifts from the hall, lutes and flutes mixing with drunken laughter. The air reeks of roasted meat, of spiced wine, of everything you've ever dreamed of eating but never could. You slip past the guards with surprising ease. They're half asleep, bellies swollen, helmets tilted. You pad through the corridors, hugging the walls, rehearsing again. The dagger, the lord, the line. This will be flawless. Then you step into the banquet hall. The floor is slick. You don't notice at first, too busy cataloging the room. The tapestries, the towering curtains, the long table where the Lord sits, cheeks flushed from wine, head thrown back in laughter. You move closer, poised to strike. Your heart hammers, your breath steadies, your dagger gleams. Then your foot slides on something wet, and you're airborne, arms flailing. The world tilts. The dagger slips from your hand, slicing through the nearest tapestry with a tear so loud it silences the entire hall. You crash to the floor, sprawled in spilled wine, cloak soaking up the stain. The dagger hangs in the tapestry, shivering as though mocking you. The Lord blinks, stunned. His guests gape. Someone gasps, "Is that an assassin?" And suddenly all eyes are on you. You scramble up, desperate to salvage what little dignity remains. Your dagger rips free of the tapestry as you tug, sending the heavy fabric collapsing on top of you. You stagger out like a drunk ghost, blade clutched in your hand. The last sip of wine. You begin, trying to reclaim the moment, but you trip again, this time into the curtains. The flame of a nearby torch leaps to the cloth, hungry and eager, and in seconds fire races upward, devouring velvet. Panic explodes. Guests shriek and scatter. Goblets overturn. Platters crash. The Lord shoves his chair back, wine spilling down his embroidered doublet as he flees. You lunge, but your foot slips again, sending you sprawling face first into a roast pheasant. The bird explodes across your mask, greasy skin clinging to your cheek like a second mocking face. You rise, blinded, greasy, choking on feathers, and slash wildly. But the only victim is the tablecloth. It rips free, dragging plates and cups to the ground in a symphony of chaos. Wine floods the floor, mixing with the flames, and smoke billows upward, curling into the rafters. People stampede for the doors, screaming of fire, of murder, of geese, though you don't know how that rumor slipped in. By the time you claw the pheasant skin from your face, the hall is nearly empty. The Lord is gone. The fire has consumed the curtains and is licking greedily at the beams. Your moment of triumph has turned into a nightmare of smoke and laughter that will echo through the village for months. You retreat, coughing, stumbling through the corridors, pursued not by guards but by your own shame. Outside, the night air slaps your face, cool and merciless. You limp back to the guild, cloak scorched, boots squelching with wine, feathers stuck to your hair. You hope, foolishly, that no one has heard, that maybe you can spin this into a tale of near success. But when you push open the door, the apprentices are already waiting, grinning like wolves. Nice tapestry work, snuffles, one calls. Fine pheasant mask. Another honks. You freeze, throat burning, while laughter erupts. Your mentor watches from the corner, shaking his head slowly, smoke curling from his pipe. "Lad," he says, voice weary, "if you wanted to kill a curtain, you could have done it here." The hall roars again, louder than the fire that still burns in your memory. You slink away, cheeks hot, wishing shadows could swallow you whole. That night, you lie awake, replaying every stumble, every slip, every laugh. You see the Lord's face, flushed with wine and disbelief, as he escaped untouched. You feel the heat of the flames, the sting of failure, the weight of humiliation heavier than any blade. You roll onto your side, cloak still reeking of smoke, and stare into the dark. You wanted to be feared. Instead, you are remembered for burning the curtains. The puddle doesn't flatter you. It ripples with every breeze, distorting your face into something both tragic and ridiculous. Eyes too wide, nose bent, mouth slack from exhaustion. You crouch there anyway, dagger in hand, cloak dragging in the mud, staring as if the water might answer the question that gnaws at your chest. Who are you? The guild says you're a blade in the dark. The villagers say you're a murderer. The apprentices say you're a goose killer. Tonight, in the reflection, you just look like a tired man with sore feet and mud in his teeth. The dagger hovers over the puddle, gleaming faintly in moonlight. Once, holding it made you feel dangerous, mysterious, powerful. Now you mostly wonder if it's worth all the blisters. You try out a dramatic stare, narrowing your eyes, tilting your head, whispering lines you once rehearsed in the dark. The night takes what it's owed. It sounds almost impressive, until you sneeze, scattering the puddle into ripples. The reflection laughs at you. Or maybe it's the memory of the apprentices. Hard to tell anymore. Your mentor insists an assassin must embrace identity like a second skin. "You are not a man," he croaks. "You are shadow. You are silence. You are inevitable." You repeat the words sometimes, trying to let them root inside you. But shadows are cold, silence is lonely, and inevitability just means no one is surprised when you fail again. You are beginning to suspect that what you really are is sore. Sore shoulders, sore knees, sore pride, and sore feet most of all, because boots never fit right when they're second-hand and patched with twine. The villagers certainly don't think of you as inevitable. They think of you as a nuisance, something to jeer at between market errands. The children mimic your walk, stomping and sneering, daggers made of sticks clutched in their grubby hands. Old women mutter prayers when you pass. A man once offered to pay you in carrots to leave town permanently. None of this screams inevitability. None of this screams shadow. It mostly screams failure. Still, you practice the stare. Because what else is there? You tilt your chin, let the moonlight catch your cheekbones, and try to look like the embodiment of death. Unfortunately, your stomach growls loudly, shattering the illusion. You stab the puddle in frustration, but all that does is splash filthy water up your cloak. Your reflection disappears, replaced by ripples, as though even the puddle is tired of you. Somewhere in the night, an owl hoots. You look up, wondering if it sees you the way the guild claims assassins should be seen. Silent, precise, master of the dark. But the owl simply blinks and swoops away, disinterested. You sigh, realizing even the birds have stopped taking you seriously. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. You imagined greatness, whispered legends, trembling enemies, the weight of respect in every glance. Instead, your life is hunger and humiliation, bruises and laughter at your expense. You wonder if other professions wrestle with this. Do blacksmiths stare into puddles, asking who they are? Do shepherds question the meaning of wool? Do bakers fight off the existential dread of bread? Or is it only you, crouched in the mud, talking to your reflection as if it might validate you? You try another dramatic line, something to reclaim the moment. Fear me, for I am the dagger in the dark. It sounds ridiculous, but you keep repeating it, hoping repetition will transform it into truth. You gesture with the blade, practicing poses. A slash, a point, a menacing tilt. A passing rat pauses, sniffs, and scurries off unimpressed. Your audience remains entirely unwilling. The puddle, at least, reflects your determination. You lean closer, dagger poised beneath your chin, eyes narrowed. You almost convince yourself you look dangerous. But then a bubble pops in the water, and your reflection wobbles, turning your dramatic scowl into something more like a pout. You burst out laughing, startling yourself with the sound. Laughter isn't supposed to belong to assassins. It feels foreign on your tongue, yet it warms your chest in a way silence never has. You stop laughing quickly, glancing around to make sure no one saw. Shadows aren't supposed to laugh. Shadows aren't supposed to doubt. Shadows aren't supposed to crouch over puddles, questioning the worth of their sore feet. Shadows kill, vanish, and repeat. That is the way. That is the lesson carved into you since birth. And yet, crouched in the mud, you can't shake the thought that maybe the shadows have lied. Maybe you aren't inevitable. Maybe you aren't silence. Maybe you're just a tired, half-hungry man rehearsing dramatic stares at dirty water while the rest of the world sleeps. The dagger gleams once more in the moonlight. You stare at it, then at the puddle, then back again. Who are you, really? A shadow? A failure? Just a man with very sore feet? The puddle offers no answers. Only ripples. Only silence. You sigh, wipe the mud from your blade, and practice the stare again anyway. Because even if you don't believe it, perhaps one day someone else will. You never asked for this. That's the thought that keeps circling in your head as you sit on a damp stone step at the edge of the village, cloak heavy with mud, stomach gnawing itself hollow. You never asked to be born into daggers and shadows, into a life where the closest thing to comfort is a blanket that smells faintly of mildew and regret. You wanted goats, maybe. A herd grazing on the hills, bells chiming softly, days filled with grass and sun instead of blood and suspicion. Goats don't laugh at you when you slip in the mud. Goats don't call you goose killer. Goats don't hand you turnips as payment for risking your life. Goats, you think bitterly, would have been kinder, or bread. Bread would have been good. You imagine yourself as a baker, arms dusted with flour instead of bruises, kneading dough instead of necks. You could have woken before dawn not to slit throats, but to slide golden loaves from ovens, filling the air with warmth instead of smoke. People would have greeted you kindly in the square, not hurled chamber pots or stones. They might even have smiled, thanked you for your work, asked for an extra roll. Bread is beloved. Bread doesn't haunt your dreams with feathers and honking. Maybe even a bard, though you only know 3 songs and one of them is about geese. You could have sat in taverns, plucking a lute, telling stories of great warriors and doomed lovers, your mistakes hidden behind the safety of rhyme. people might have paid you in coins or drinks, not rotting vegetables. Even your vinegar scent could have passed as eccentricity, part of the charm of a wandering musician. You imagine strumming a tune, the crowd clapping along, no one throwing cabbages at your head unless it was in rhythm. Instead, you are this: cold, tired, broke, hungry, mocked, and perpetually muddy. Mud in your boots, mud in your hair, mud in your very soul. You stalk shadows not because you want to, but because it's the only thing you've ever been told you're good for. And even then, most of the time, you aren't good at it. You slip. You stumble. You stab tapestries instead of lords. You lose duels to men who smell like pine. You are feared by no one, loved by fewer, and laughed at by nearly everyone. The guild tells you this is glory, that each failure is a lesson, each bruise a mark of progress, each hunger pang a sharpening stone for the spirit. You try to believe them. You try to tell yourself that the loneliness, the ridicule, the endless ache in your bones are all stepping stones to greatness. But when you lie awake on straw that scratches your back raw, you wonder if greatness was ever meant for you at all. The villagers have their version of you: the fool who kills cabbages, the menace who murdered a goose, the shadow who slips in mud louder than a drunk in clogs. They point, they laugh, they spit. You tell yourself it doesn't matter, that assassins aren't meant to be liked, but a small part of you aches for even one nod of respect, just once. You'd like someone to look at you and see more than a joke in a hood. The truth is, you are tired. Tired of hunger, tired of bruises, tired of practicing dramatic stares in puddles that only mock you. You are tired of being a shadow that no one fears, tired of being inevitable only in your failure. You are tired of being cold, always damp, always pulling a cloak tighter that never warms you. You want fire, you want laughter, you want bread, but most of all, you want choice. You want to choose goats, or loaves, or songs. You want to walk into the square without someone shouting murderer or honking in your face. You want to exist without daggers defining you, without shadows claiming you, without the guild telling you that pain is purpose. You want to be someone, not something. Yet here you are, an assassin, not by choice, not by triumph, but by inheritance. You were born into it, swaddled with whispers of blood before you could even hold your own head upright. You never asked, and yet you never escaped. You carry the daggers, you wear the cloak, you live in the muck and the ridicule, because there is nowhere else to go. So you sit there on the step, staring into the night, listening to the laughter of taverns you'll never enter, smelling the bread you'll never bake, hearing the faint bleating of goats that will never be yours. You clutch your dagger, more out of habit than conviction, and whisper to the shadows as if they might finally listen. This is why it sucks. Truly, deeply, undeniably, and the shadows do not argue.